Hi, besties! Welcome back! Today we're diving into a story that literally goes from 0 to 100 faster than you can blink. It's called In the Jungle with My Boss. We've got the ultimate overworked secretary meets cold genius boss trope, but with a twist. They're plane wrecked in a jungle. If you love a story where the cold CEO finally loses his cool, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and let's jump straight into the drama. Instead of enjoying a well-deserved weekend, she found herself in the middle of a dense jungle, dying of thirst. The young woman was desperately searching for water, but her plans were interrupted by a sudden scream. She spun around at the sound, expecting to see something horrifying. But the cause of the panic was far more mundane. Her boss wasn't scared of a venomous snake, but of a simple spider web. This helpless pretty boy was Kang Hajun, the CEO of Yeonhee Company. And ironically, he was her boss. She silently picked up a stick to show him how easily this problem could be solved. She gave him a reproachful look, wondering how anyone could be afraid of a spider web, as if it could electrocute them. Hajun awkwardly looked away. In normal life, a CEO and a junior secretary would never cross paths like this, far from the urban jungle. But reality was much harsher. They were somewhere in the vicinity of Banten, Indonesia, with no one knowing their exact location. Suddenly, her eyes sparkled with joy. She spotted edible cherry guavas on a tree. This was their chance. So how did they end up in this situation? To understand, we need to go back a bit, to the bustling offices of Yeonhee Company. Once just a subsidiary, it had grown into a giant thanks to breakthrough technologies. A success story that was hard to believe. Working in the secretary's office was like a battlefield. An enormous workload fell on every employee's shoulders. And Yeonhee, being a low-ranking secretary, was no exception. Her day was filled with minor troubles, like the constantly broken printer. But all the office hustle froze the moment he appeared at the doorway. Mr. Kang. Kang Hajun was an IT genius who had brought the company to the global stage in a short time. He was the leader of this office army. He walked down the hall, discussing the details of his Indonesia trip with his assistant, where the marketing team had already arrived. Hajun gave an order to clean the conference room in 30 minutes, as another meeting was scheduled right after the current one. Her senior colleague immediately passed the task onto Yeonhee, who could only meekly agree. Many thought a secretary was the closest person to the CEO, but in reality, that wasn't the case at all. Yeonhee waited by the conference room, assuming the meeting would end soon. Suddenly, the door flew open and Hajun slammed a stack of documents on the table. A dead silence fell over the room. He contemptuously asked the team if this was the report they had spent a whole week on. Yeonhee sighed. She had never made eye contact with him, but she knew his personality well. He believed they had wasted a week on something he could have done in 2 hours. The senior secretary cautiously reminded him it was time to leave for the airport. Hajun irritably stated that they had delayed him with their useless presentation and abruptly ended the meeting. For his unyielding stamina and complete lack of sympathy, the employees had nicknamed him the Cyborg. Or the alien. Yeonhee stood aside, holding a folder. Behind Hajun's back, her colleagues sighed in relief. They were glad the meeting ended early because of his business trip. For Yeonhee, it meant one thing: a long-awaited chance to leave work on time. Yeonhee Company manufactured key parts for mobile phones and had recently developed a revolutionary battery that didn't need recharging. It was to present this technology at an event in Indonesia that Hajun was personally going on a business trip. And for Yeonhee, it was a great opportunity to finally not stay late at the office. She was already packing her bag, anticipating leaving at 6 on the dot when the phone rang. She picked up the phone, surprised, not expecting a call at this time. The person on the other end introduced himself as Kang Hajun. The name sounded vaguely familiar, and then it hit her. Mr. Kang? She jumped up from her seat in shock. He ordered her not to let on that he was the one calling. Still in shock, Yeonhee whispered a quiet, "Yes, sir." Hajun told her to calm down and listen. She was just about to leave work. Yeonhee mumbled that she was finishing up, but her boss immediately shushed her. He reminded her again that no one should guess who she was talking to. To throw off her colleagues, she loudly said a random phrase about food. After making sure no one was listening, she told Hajun it was clear. He stressed that the matter was very important. He asked if she had her passport with her and ordered her to immediately book a flight to Jakarta in her name. To Jakarta? Right now? She couldn't believe her ears, but he confirmed the earliest flight possible. Yeonhee was in complete shock from such a sudden order. Her entire weekend was ruined. Hajun promised to generously compensate her for working at such short notice. She quickly checked the flights. The earliest was at 10 p.m. with a layover in Bangkok, taking a total of 16 hours. Yeonhee noted hopefully that it was still better than the next flight, which was 33 hours long. She tried to suggest a direct flight at 8 in the morning, which only took 7 hours, but Hajun cut her off and ordered her to take the night flight. Inwardly, she was seething with anger at this evil boss who had stolen her weekend. Gathering her courage, she asked what she should do next. At that moment, her senior colleague, Ms. Jung, called out to her. She announced that she and some colleagues were going for sashimi and invited Yeonhee to join them. Yeonhee politely declined, citing made-up plans. The colleague noted snidely that Yeonhee was always busy but didn't seem to have a boyfriend. Ms. Jung, with a fake smile, expressed hope that Yeonhee would join them next time, though both knew it was just empty words. As she was leaving, the colleague tossed another task over her shoulder. Come in early on Monday and buy a few kinds of tea that had run out. They had joined the company at the same time, but Ms. Jung always acted like her superior. Yeonhee promised to get it done before anyone else arrived, so no one would guess who did someone else's work. Left alone, she sighed. She loved sashimi too. But that was okay. She was also having dinner out tonight. That dinner was an in-flight meal, which she enjoyed despite the circumstances. She used to be afraid of flying, but frequent business trips with Mr. Kang had helped her get used to it, though sleeping on a plane was still difficult. And this whole urgent trip was for one very important mission. She had to deliver his favorite green tumbler. Yeonhee recalled interviews with celebrities who carried their favorite items with them. An actress with her childhood pillow, and a famous idol with a teddy bear, his good luck charm. And now, CEO Kang Hajun had ordered her to secretly and immediately bring him his green tumbler. She even looked it up online, blanket syndrome, a condition where an adult maintains a strong attachment to a childhood object. The unbelievably handsome IT genius, Kang Hajun, was suffering from an unhealthy attachment to a tumbler. Why else would he make her fly to Jakarta? But why did she have to suffer because of it? Exhausted from the long journey, she finally arrived at Jakarta's international airport. She couldn't believe the absurdity of the situation. Rich people like Mr. Kang send people halfway across the world for a mug, while she had to overcome her aerophobia just to deliver it. She recalled his instructions. A man named Hone would meet her at the airport, and she was to follow his directions. Suddenly, a strong hand grabbed her wrist. A large, bearded man stood before her, pronouncing her name with a thick accent. She realized he was trying to say, Mo Yeonhee. Could this suspicious-looking guy be the Hwan she was told about? The man smiled broadly and confirmed he was Hone. Yeonhee was shocked. They drove in an old jeep through some deserted area, kicking up clouds of dust. Panic seized her. Where were they? And who was this suspicious man? Hone assured her with a smile that they were almost there. But Yeonhee knew the new product presentation was supposed to be at a luxury hotel, not in this wasteland. Suddenly, a helicopter appeared above them, descending with a roar. Hwan stopped the car. Yeonhee watched in horror. He got out of the car, approached the pilot, took an envelope of money, and left, leaving her alone. Her worst fears were coming true. She was being sold. She cursed the day she agreed to this whole mess because of a guy with his stupid tumbler. A tall man emerged from the helicopter. The dust slowly settled, and she recognized him. It was Kang Hajun himself. He walked up and thanked her for making the long journey. At that moment, she remembered how it all began 2 years ago when she first started at Hain Company. Back then, a senior colleague had forced her to carry a huge stack of documents alone. She had stumbled, and all the papers scattered across the hallway. Yeonhee was on the floor, picking up the sheets, when a department head passing by scolded her. He yelled that she shouldn't be making a mess in the hallway, apologizing to Mr. Kang, who was walking behind him. Hajun walked past without even a glance in her direction. To her, he was a person from a different world, whose life never intersected with hers, even when they were in the same space. And now, that same person was standing right in front of her, in the middle of a desert. She tried to hide her excitement, saying she was just doing her job, but he was insistent. He told her to think about a reward she wanted, promising to grant any reasonable request before she returned to Korea. A promotion, money, a vacation, whatever it was, she was pleased that her hard work was finally being acknowledged. She smiled and told him she brought the tumbler as he asked and had been very careful with it. Hajun smiled warmly and praised her for a great job. Looking at his happy face, she thought about how much he must have missed his mug. She even felt a little sorry for him. She was about to take the tumbler out of her bag, but he stopped her, saying they were leaving soon. Leaving? To where? A wave of terror washed over her. He hadn't mentioned they would be taking a helicopter. She froze in place, trembling with fear. She had aerophobia and couldn't get on a helicopter. Yeonhee asked who would fly it since Hwan had left. Hajun calmly replied that he would, as he had gotten his pilot's license in his early 20s. Outwardly, she feigned admiration for his talents, but inside, she was clenched with fear. She reminded him that her return flight to Korea was in 3 hours, but he just brushed it off, promising to pay for a business class ticket so she could get back to work on Monday. So she'd have to work right after landing? This crazy boss! But the thought of her first ever business class flight softened the blow a little. He added that she shouldn't thank him too much because he was even more grateful to her. He promised again to compensate her for all the trouble, and she could only thank him politely in return. But the fear didn't go away. Did she really have to get into that helicopter? Her feet felt rooted to the ground. She couldn't understand why, of all the employees in the company, this fate had befallen her. Hajun noticed her hesitation. He said it seemed he had overlooked something important and walked towards her. Unexpectedly, he swept her up into his arms like a princess. Yeonhee cried out in surprise. She couldn't believe what was happening. Hajun explained with a slight smirk that it would have been difficult for her to get in by herself in her clothes, so he just decided to help. He gently placed her in the seat. She was inside, but the horror only intensified. He fastened the seatbelts and advised her to be careful with her heels, but her heels were the least of her worries. A chill ran down her spine. She wanted only one thing: to get off this damn helicopter. But it was too late. The helicopter soared into the sky. The large windows made everything seem much scarier than on a plane. Nausea rose in her throat. Hajun, oblivious to her condition, asked with a smile, "Isn't it cool?" She mumbled something affirmative, squeezing her eyes shut. He asked in surprise how she could see anything with her eyes closed. Yeonhee confessed that she would throw up if she opened them. It finally dawned on him. He frowned and asked if she had aerophobia. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to suppress a wave of nausea. He was bewildered. Why didn't she tell him? She tried to argue that no one would hire a secretary with aerophobia, but she was overcome with nausea again. At that moment, Hajun showed unexpected care and handed her a bottle of water. He advised her to look up, or not to look down, or even better, to look at him. Then she would feel better. She raised her eyes to him and froze. He was so handsome. So much so that for a moment, she even forgot her fear. Hajun noticed her staring and cleared his throat, embarrassed. He said that she kept looking, so he suggested it. Yeonhee blushed to the roots of her hair. She thanked him for the cold water, saying she felt better. He decided to give her some advice. You have to overcome fear by facing it head-on. Easier said than done, she thought indignantly. She said he was too perfect to understand her, but her condition was similar to how he couldn't live without his tumbler. Yeonhee quickly assured him that she would never tell anyone about his love for the mug, even if she got fired. But Hajun calmly replied that no one would fire the company's savior. Savior? She assumed he meant himself, since he was the heart and soul of the company. That meant his attachment to the tumbler was really serious. She tried to encourage him, saying that everyone has their problems these days. She has aerophobia, an acquaintance of hers has insomnia, so he had nothing to be ashamed of. At that moment, the helicopter lurched violently. Hajun swore and gripped the controls. Yeonhee thought he was angry at her for her unsolicited advice and started to apologize. He yelled at her to stay still. He wasn't talking to her, but to the helicopter. Hajun was trying to figure out what was wrong with the controls and who had done this. The aircraft was shaking more and more violently, losing control. Alarms blared in the cockpit. Yeonhee screamed in panic that they were going to crash. Hajun, not taking his eyes off the instruments, grimly confirmed, "I think so." Everything clicked into place in his mind. He realized the target wasn't the new technology prototype, but him. He yelled that they needed to get out of the helicopter. Get out? In midair? She asked in horror if that meant they were going to die. Luckily, there was water below, which gave them a chance. He ordered her to look at him and calm down, but she fought him off hysterically, screaming that it was all his fault. He firmly promised they wouldn't die and told her to trust him and unbuckle her seatbelt. She refused, but he didn't listen and unbuckled it himself. He opened the door, and a deafening roar of wind burst into the cabin. He ordered her to drop her bag and hold on to him. It was the only way to survive. But she couldn't. In a panic, she screamed that the tumbler was in the bag. Through tears, she stammered that she wanted him to be happy, because he'd be lonely in heaven without his mug. Hajun looked at her with disbelief. In the next second, he snatched the bag from her and hurled it overboard. She screamed in horror, unable to believe he had thrown away his beloved tumbler. He pressed her head to his chest, blocking her view. And in the next moment, they fell together. There was a deafening splash. Yeonhee's consciousness blurred. She saw her own funeral photograph. Was she really dead? She saw her younger brother, Yeonhee, in a wheelchair and wondered how he would manage without her. A thought about her insurance flashed through her mind. She had died while running an errand for her boss. But then she heard her colleagues whispering that she had gone to Indonesia on vacation. She grabbed her head in panic. No one knew the truth. It was all that stupid CEO's fault. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her chest, and the vision began to fade. She woke up on a shore. Hajun was leaning over her, performing chest compressions. He was desperately pleading with her to breathe. He checked for her pulse. Then, pinching her nose, he leaned in to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. He continued to fight for her life, desperately calling her name. She slowly opened her eyes, seeing the blurry face of a handsome stranger above her. His lips touched hers. Her first thought was that she was in heaven. And heaven turned out to be quite damp. The voice above her anxiously asked if she was okay. It was Kang Hajun. She looked at him, still not fully understanding what was happening. She asked if he was in heaven too. He told her to get a grip. They weren't dead. Then where were they? Her head was pounding. The memories of the helicopter crash and the jump into the water rushed back in a whirlwind. She sat up, holding her head. Hajun touched her shoulder with concern. She looked at him. He had saved her. But wait, if this isn't heaven... She asked if he had performed CPR on her. He nodded, saying that she wasn't breathing. Her eyes widened in horror. Her first kiss! She burst into tears, mourning its loss, while a baffled Hajun tried to figure out what was wrong. She asked why he pushed her so hard. She thought he was going to break her ribs. He admitted he couldn't feel her ribs at all, only her chest. He cut himself off mid-sentence. He cleared his throat awkwardly and said it didn't matter. Yeonhee looked herself over. She had lost her heels and her hair tie. She sadly noted that she had lost the rubber band she used to tie her hair. Hajun promised to buy her 100 rubber bands once they got back to Jakarta and to compensate her for everything else. Compensate. That word again. Compensation wasn't the problem right now. She wanted to tell him everything she was thinking. that he almost got her killed over a stupid tumbler, and that money doesn't solve everything. But she held back. This was harsh reality, and she couldn't afford to lash out at her boss. She brushed herself off and firmly said she needed to go home. He grabbed her hand, asking where she was going. They needed to get to the airport so she could make it to work on Monday. He told her not to worry about work. She noted that he at least looked guilty, but insisted. No one knew where she was, and her absence would raise suspicion. Hajun grabbed his head. That wasn't the main problem right now. She guessed he didn't know the way and suggested calling a taxi, reminding him that her phone was in the bag he threw away. So they'd have to use his phone. An awkward silence fell, broken only by the cries of seagulls. She looked at him in horror, begging him to say she was wrong. But he just covered his face with his hand in guilt. He admitted the bitter truth. They were in a jungle, and they were lost. She didn't give up and suggested they call for rescue, but he revealed he'd left his phone at the hotel because he was afraid of being tracked. Tracked? He explained that someone had been following him, and the helicopter crash was no accident. It dawned on her. Someone had intentionally damaged the helicopter to kill him. He confirmed her suspicion. Her mind raced with wild theories about his dark dealings, bribes, love affairs, criminal connections. As if reading her mind, he cut her off, assuring her he had never done any of the things she was imagining. He didn't know who was after him or why, but he was determined to find out once they got back to Jakarta. Back to Jakarta. That goal seemed unattainable right now. She laughed, saying they couldn't walk for days in their current state, and referenced her favorite survival show. And then it hit her. She asked if Ms. Han, his senior secretary, would come looking for him. Hajun dejectedly replied that he had told her he was just going for a walk. She exploded. Where was he going? Why did he hide it from his assistant? He snapped back that he didn't end up going anywhere, so it didn't matter. She grabbed her head. She couldn't believe his irresponsibility. He coldly remarked that he wasn't going to apologize because her anger wouldn't change anything. He was right, but that didn't make it any easier. She felt anger boiling up inside her. He should have apologized. In despair, she sat on the sand and buried her face in her hands. Hajun silently sat down next to her. He looked completely lost. She realized she wasn't the only one having a hard time. She had always thought he was invincible, but now she saw his vulnerability. It was time to pull herself together. She jumped to her feet, declaring decisively that they couldn't just sit around and wait. First things first, they needed to find water. He looked at her in surprise. She enthusiastically quoted the host of her favorite show. "If there's no water, you have to eat fruit." She pointed to the cherry guava tree she had seen earlier. They walked closer. Hajun looked at the tree, but his gaze lingered on her. He clarified if she was talking about the red fruits on the tall tree. She enthusiastically described how delicious and juicy they must be. However, the man replied that they didn't look very sweet. Thinking about the juicy berries, Yeonhee kept staring at his lips, remembering how they had touched hers and thought they were very soft and very warm. Her words were ambiguous, and the air between them grew thick with tension. She had completely forgotten about the disaster. There was only one thought in her head. They had kissed. It was her first kiss. Hajun, snapping out of his thoughts, turned to her and asked if she had ever tried cherry guavas. Their eyes met, and a spark flew between them. She was out of her mind. What was she thinking in a situation like this? Yeonhee shook her head and said she had never tried them. She got nervous. Did he notice her ridiculous thoughts? He said it might sound strange, but with her hair down, she looked like a different person. He asked her directly, "Ms. Mo, have you always been this pretty?" Her heart started pounding furiously. He thinks she's pretty? For Mr. Kang, who had seen so much beauty in his life, to say something like that was incredible. She frantically tried to think of a witty reply. He thought he had made her uncomfortable and started to apologize. She rushed to assure him it was okay. She blurted out that she liked the compliment and asked him to say it more often to give her the energy to survive. What was she even saying? To her surprise, he agreed, adding that it was true anyway. The conversation was getting more and more awkward. She needed to change the subject quickly. She remembered their goal, the cherry guavas. She pulled him towards the tree, eager to do something, anything. Suddenly, Hajun wobbled. Yeonhee turned pale and started to fall. He caught her. She was dizzy from dehydration. He told her to sit down. She sat on the sand and asked him to pick the fruit for her. She looked at him hopefully, confident that he could do it. After all, he had such strong muscles. He agreed to try. She cheered him on, clenching her fists. Hajun walked up to the tree and started shaking it. But after a few attempts, he turned around and said he couldn't do it. He suggested they give up and find another tree. Yeonhee was shocked.
Give up?
The infamous Kang Hajun, who never uttered that word, was giving up after a few shakes? What a waste of muscles! She mumbled under her breath that the host of her favorite show would have definitely managed. She described him with admiration, as a true leader who would take any risk for his people. Hajun's eye twitched with jealousy. He asked if this host was taller and more handsome than him. She replied that it was a matter of taste, but personally, she thought he was very cool, and he was her ideal type. His pride stung. Hajun attacked the tree again with renewed fury. Yeonhee stopped him, realizing it was useless. She said she had another plan, and resolutely grabbed the hem of her skirt. He looked at her, puzzled. With a tearing sound, she ripped her skirt up the side to allow for more movement. Hajun blushed and looked away. She sighed in relief. Now it was much easier to move. Still red, he asked how she could just tear her skirt like that. She shrugged. She had no choice. His sudden shyness was making her feel embarrassed too. She announced that she was ready and told him to let her ride on his shoulders. He was shocked. He had never carried anyone on his shoulders before. It wasn't about her weight. She suddenly remembered he was her boss. Asking your boss to give you a shoulder ride was, to say the least, strange. He covered his face with his hand, saying it wasn't about the discomfort. He was just afraid that she might get hurt because of him. His concern touched her deeply. She resorted to her last argument. If they didn't pick the fruit, she would die of dehydration. He gave in and crouched down for her to climb on. They swayed from side to side, trying to keep their balance. Finally, she settled on his shoulders, grabbing his head for stability. Her heart started beating faster again. The position was very intimate. She remembered how embarrassed he was when she tore her skirt. But now he seemed fine with this. She ran her fingers through his soft hair. He asked why she was holding his head, if she was afraid of falling. At that moment, his fingers, holding her leg, squeezed a little tighter, and she shuddered at the unexpected touch. She wanted to say something, but the words got stuck in her throat. Barely controlling her emotions, she asked him to take 2 steps to the right. They were right next to the branch with the fruit. She picked a berry and took a bite. The taste was divine, like fireworks. He reminded her that she could get sick if she didn't wash the fruit. She waved it off, saying they were organic, and continued to eat them with pleasure. Hajun was horrified. Was she eating bugs along with the fruit? She asked him to let her down. Once down, she showed him a handful of juicy berries. He looked at her in amazement. He asked how many she ate up there. He pointed to her lips, saying they were covered in juice. She embarrassedly started wiping them. He said, "Not there. Over here." He reached out and wiped the corner of her mouth himself. She tried to pull away, but he held her steady, telling her to be still. His thumb gently brushed against her lips. They stood very close, looking into each other's eyes, and the world around them seemed to stand still. Their faces were just inches apart. The tension was thick in the air. Hajun was the first to break the silence, noting detachedly that the product demonstration must have already started back at the company. Yeonhee flinched, pulled back to their harsh reality. She thought with annoyance that she could be sleeping soundly in her bed right now, instead of suffering in the jungle. Hajun added grimly that his secretary, Ms. Han, was probably running around frantically looking for him. They both started talking over each other, complaining about their problems. Her brother doesn't even know she's missing, his presentation is going to fail, and a mountain of dirty dishes and laundry is waiting for her at home. Finally, Hajun cut off the pointless argument and suggested they head back to the shore. But Yeonhee wasn't ready to let it go. Suddenly, he stopped short and called out to her. With a worried tone, Hajun announced that the footprints they had been following had disappeared. They looked around. Nothing but impenetrable jungle surrounded them. They were lost. Yeonhee sank into thought, trying to figure out what to do next. Wandering through the forest without food would be pure madness. Noticing her shoulders tremble, Hajun gently touched her, asking with concern if she was crying. She turned around and he immediately pulled his hand back, realizing his mistake. He noted with surprise that she wasn't crying, even in such a hopeless situation. Yeonhee stated firmly that she doesn't cry, because, as she believed, tears don't solve anything. She was about to walk on, but Hajun stopped her again. And only then did he realize with horror that she had been walking barefoot through the jungle this whole time. He asked why she hadn't told him, as it must have been painful. Yeonhee simply replied that it wouldn't have changed anything. After all, there are no shoe stores in the jungle. Without a word, Hajun knelt down on one knee and began taking off his own shoes, offering them to her. Yeonhee was shocked. What about him? But he just waved it off, saying he had his socks. He grabbed her ankle firmly, not giving her a chance to object. Yeonhee lost her balance, and he immediately told her to lean on his shoulder. She mumbled shyly that he didn't have to do this. But Hajun, without looking at her, replied that he's the kind of person who likes certainty in everything. Those words struck a chord with Yeonhee. She said she had a question for a man who loves certainty so much. She asked if he remembered the day she first came to greet him. The memory took her back 2 years. She had knocked timidly on his office door. The head secretary introduced her as the new employee, and Yeonhee's heart was pounding with nervousness. Hajun sat at his desk, buried in documents, and didn't even bother to look up at her. He coldly ordered her to introduce herself. Yeonhee bowed and stated her name. After promising to do her best, all she got in return was a dry, "Good," before he immediately turned his attention to the head secretary, scolding her for missing documents. In that moment, Yeonhee felt completely invisible. Back in the present, as he was putting his shoe on her foot, she asked him directly why he had treated her that way. She reminded him that he had acted as if she didn't even exist in the room. Yet he had politely had tea with the other new employee, Ms. Jung, when she came to greet him. Hajun frowned, trying to remember who she was talking about. He explained that Ms. Jung's father was his college mentor, which was why he'd spent time with her. It was nothing special. Yeonhee then asked resentfully why he hadn't asked Ms. Jung to deliver his precious tumbler. Hajun looked up at her and simply replied that he thought she would do a better job. And that answer was enough. Despite the girl's embarrassment, Kang Hajun asked her to give him her other leg. She couldn't believe that the incident that had upset her for 2 whole years suddenly didn't seem to matter anymore. Was it all because Kang Hajun, the distant and unapproachable CEO, was now sitting at her feet, brushing off the dirt and putting his own shoes on her? He was focused on tying the laces, explaining that they had to be tight so she wouldn't fall. When she stood up, he asked her to walk around and see if they were comfortable. Yeonhee replied that she felt like a child waddling in such huge shoes. For the first time, Hajun let out a genuine laugh, telling her she was exaggerating. His laugh caught Yeonhee by surprise. She stared at him, feeling her cheeks flush. Suddenly, an idea struck her. She announced that she would climb a tree to see where the sea was. Hajun tried to stop her in a panic, but Yeonhee was determined. She assured him she was a rock climber, and this was no problem for her. She only noted with regret that she'd have to take his shoes off. Hajun cried out in horror that the shoes were not the problem. But it was too late. Yeonhee was already scrambling up the trunk, telling him not to worry. Hajun sighed. She hadn't changed at all. His thoughts drifted back again, but this time, 7 years ago, to a youth support event. He was sitting next to his father, Chairman Kang, when a scholarship student was invited to the stage to read her poem. The host announced, "Autumn," by Mo Yeonhee. The name sounded familiar to Hajun. A young Yeonhee enthusiastically read from the stage about how much delicious food there is in autumn. Apples, pears, persimmons, rice, and even pizza. Hajun sat in the audience with a stone face, wondering why they chose such a ridiculous poem. Yeonhee finished by hoping to eat even more at the event. She concluded her performance by making a heart shape with her hands and shouting, "3 cheers for Chairman Kang." Hajun's father laughed heartily. He called her an interesting girl, and Hajun had to agree. But to himself, he thought that this girl was already learning how to suck up to people at such a young age. 2 years ago, when he first saw her resume at his company, he immediately remembered that incident. He was displeased that his father's company had sent him this employee. He complained about having to deal with the personnel his father was casting off, but his subordinate reminded him of the employee exchange agreement. Hajun was furious. His father had given him independence, yet continued to meddle in his company's affairs with stupid agreements. He made a decision then and there. His company would no longer accept or send any employees to his father's company. Looking at the photo on her resume, he swore that if she tried to write him weird poems to flatter him, he would fire her. Later, arriving at a company dinner, he noticed that not all the employees were present. He was told that only one person was missing, Ms. Mo. Hajun frowned, as he had ordered everyone to attend. He was reminded that Ms. Mo was the same scholarship student who had recently been transferred from his father's company. He cut them off, stating that the agreement was terminated and she was now his employee, so there should be no special treatment. His subordinates nervously explained that her reason for being absent was different. It turned out her brother had injured his hand, and the head secretary had let her go home. Hajun coldly remarked that an injury required a hospital, not a call to one's sister. Then the secretary told him the truth, with a heavy sigh. Yeonhee's parents had died in an accident when she was young, and her brother was disabled. With an injured hand, he couldn't operate his electric wheelchair. Hearing this, Hajun froze. So that's why she wrote that poem. It wasn't flattery. It was a cry for help, her desperate way of surviving in a cruel world. He realized she should have been praised, not laughed at. She deserved admiration for smiling through her hardships and making others laugh. And he, without knowing her story, had been hasty and judgmental. He turned to his subordinate, Mr. Park. Hajun asked if the atmosphere in the office was always this heavy when he wasn't around. Park assured him their department was the most fun in the company. Hajun then announced they would have another company dinner next week, a faint smile on his face. Everyone was thrilled with the boss's generosity. But Miss Mo didn't attend that dinner, or any of the ones that followed. She silently carried out her duties, trying to be as unnoticeable as possible. She was there, but it was as if she wasn't, like a person deliberately avoiding the spotlight. And now, in the jungle, Hajun smiled as he watched her, thinking he had lost hope of ever seeing that cheerful girl from 7 years ago again. Yeonhee, already up the tree, yelled down, asking if he was even listening. Hajun coughed awkwardly, thinking to himself that she was still so confident and didn't care about others' opinions. Suddenly, a joyful shout came from the top of the tree. She could see the sea. But then Hajun screamed in terror as he saw her hand slipping. He begged her not to let go of the tree and to come down immediately. She agreed, but as she started to descend, her bare foot slipped on the smooth trunk. Hajun lunged forward in a panic, his arms outstretched to catch her. Luckily, she managed to grab a branch and was left dangling, narrowly avoiding a fall. He yelled at her to be careful, saying she had scared him to death. And in that moment, he froze. She was the one who almost fell. So why was he the one who was so scared? When she got down, she noticed he looked unwell. She asked if she had really scared him that much. Hajun just said he was a little startled. But Yeonhee didn't buy it. Judging by his pale face, he was much more than a little startled. She reached for his face to check if he had a fever. Her touch made his heart skip a beat, then start pounding at a frantic pace. He stared at her, a strange tremor running through his body. He couldn't understand why his heart was racing like that. He grabbed her hand and pressed it to his own forehead, asking if he felt warm. His own touch on her hand sent another wave of heat through him, and his heart beat even faster. He abruptly pulled away, grabbed her hand, and said they needed to hurry to the shore because it was getting cold. Yeonhee was confused about the cold weather and noted that he definitely didn't have a fever. Hajun walked ahead, trying to figure out what was wrong with him. No fever, yet he felt unbearably hot. Maybe it was stress? Thorny bushes appeared ahead. Yeonhee took charge, saying she had shoes and would go first, and he should follow her. Hajun obediently agreed. He watched her back, and the sunlight filtering through the leaves created a glowing halo around her. A flustered but warm expression appeared on his face. Finally, breaking through the thicket, Yeonhee joyfully announced they had arrived. A sandy shore stretched out before them. They had reached the coast. She asked if he wasn't happy, but Hajun, with his usual coolness, wondered if he was supposed to be proud of this accomplishment. Yeonhee sighed and asked if he knew that everyone at the company called him an alien. He asked in surprise. She explained that people saw him as a cyborg, incapable of emotions, and often told him to go back to his home planet. Hajun looked out at the ocean and replied that it wasn't that he didn't know how to empathize, he just didn't want to, because he hated feeling someone else's pain. Yeonhee was puzzled. So he was deliberately suppressing his empathy? But why? She thought that here, on the island, he seemed completely different. Anyway, she decided to push those thoughts aside and focus on the more immediate problem: how they were going to sleep. Hajun walked barefoot on the sand, pondering her words. He didn't care what people said about him. He had always believed that to succeed, you had to focus only on yourself. Other people were just strangers who had nothing to do with him. But then why, when Yeonhee almost fell from the tree? Couldn't he remain indifferent? He picked up a seashell from the sand, examining it thoughtfully. His reaction completely contradicted his life's principles. Yeonhee watched him from a distance. Even on a deserted island, he looked like he had just stepped out of a commercial. She mentally scolded herself, ordering her heart not to be swayed by a handsome guy picking up inedible seashells. She needed to think about survival, finding food, building a shelter, and figuring out how to get back to Jakarta. The mere thought of all these challenges was horrifying. On top of that, she had to drag along this rich guy who had never known hardship. Her head was already spinning. Steeling herself, she walked up to him and gave her first command. Start a fire. He asked how, and she told him to gather some branches. Hajun irritably clarified that he was asking how to start a fire without matches. Yeonhee calmly replied, with friction. He argued that while theoretically possible, it was nearly impossible in practice. Yeonhee gave him a reproachful look. Was he really going to give up without even trying? After a while, Hajun, drenched in sweat, was vigorously rubbing the stick. His hands were burning, and sweat was running down his face, while Yeonhee sat nearby, yawning in boredom. After 2 hours, he jumped up in despair, shouting that it wasn't working and never would. He gave up, suggesting they try to start a fire with his watch glass tomorrow and just go to sleep for now. But Yeonhee was relentless. If he couldn't start a fire, then he should go find food. She explained they needed to eat to build up strength for the long journey to Jakarta. Hajun admitted with horror that he had never caught a fish in his life. Yeonhee sighed. She had figured as much. She suggested they fill up on guava for now and gather other fruits on the way. But she couldn't resist a jab, noting that he couldn't even climb a tree. He got indignant, asking if she was laughing at his incompetence. Yeonhee immediately started praising him, saying how smart and strong he was and that there was nothing he couldn't achieve. But, after a pause, she added that all of that only worked in the city. Out here, in the wild, he couldn't do much of anything. Hajun, through gritted teeth, was forced to admit she was right. Yeonhee continued that this was about survival. They needed to eat and sleep warmly to survive and get back. And since he lacked the necessary skills, he had to acknowledge her as the leader here. Hajun was stunned by her audacity. She was going to be his superior? Yeonhee firmly confirmed it. He argued that they didn't need a leader since there were only 2 of them. She countered that a leader was necessary precisely because there were 2 of them, and they had no time for arguments. Hajun was silent, dumbfounded by her logic. She added that he had no idea how amazing her survival skills were. Painful memories flooded her mind. Her parents' death, and her aunt taking her and her brother in. But soon her aunt had squandered all the insurance money, and their life became a living hell. One day, Yeonhee overheard her aunt calling an orphanage to get rid of them. She tried to find help, but it was useless. When her aunt found out Yeonhee knew, she flew into a rage and threw them out onto the street. Hugging her crying brother, a young Yeonhee swore they would make it on their own. A fierce determination burned in her eyes. They would survive. Back in the present, she listed her skills to Hajun. She could fish with a spear, gather shellfish, and find edible fruits. Besides, she was a rock climber, and he himself had seen her climb that tree. And finally, she declared that she knew how to start a fire. Hajun froze. He jumped to his feet and asked indignantly why she had made him do it then. Yeonhee smiled and said she was inspired by his own year-end speech. She quoted his words about how recognizing one's weaknesses is a driving force for self-improvement. She told him to forget about their status, gender, and age difference. For now, she asked him to trust her and follow her as the leader. Hajun clutched his head. So she wanted to order him around because she was more capable? Yeonhee pretended to hesitate, musing that a secretary can't order her boss around. And then she delivered the final blow, declaring that in that case, she was resigning, effective immediately. Hajun yelled in a panic that she couldn't do that. She immediately caught him on his words. If he still considered her his secretary, could he do what she asked of him? Hajun was trapped. Straightening up, she announced that from this moment on, she was the leader, and he had to obey her without question. Hajun still couldn't believe it, but she left him no choice. With a radiant smile, she gave her first order. Go find firewood. Hajun crouched with 2 sticks in his hands, unable to process what was happening. Him, a CEO, having to obey her? But he had to admit that in this situation, she really was more competent than him. He began his task with enthusiasm, finding suitable dry branches and even a whole log. When he was done, he wiped the sweat from his brow, pleased with his work. But then he snapped back to reality. What was he doing? He kicked the log in frustration. He grabbed his head, thinking about how everything at the company was probably falling apart without him. Where did it all go wrong? What was his mistake? His thoughts took him back to the past. The trip to Indonesia was just a pretext. The real purpose was to sign a contract for a bauxite mine. Right in the middle of a meeting, his head secretary had approached him. She delivered terrible news. The mining company had refused to supply them with bauxite. The chairman, Kang, was furious. This jeopardized the release of their key component. Kang Hajun's brother, Sungjun, intervened, promising to look into it. But their father yelled at Sungjun, accusing him of inaction and reminding him that Hajun's company's problems would affect their core business as well. Hajun realized his father was using him again to spur his brother into competition. He was tired of this endless fight for control of the family business. He declared he would solve this problem himself. His father flew into a rage, reminding Hajun that his company had only grown thanks to the support of the main group. Skipping repeats the previous frame, close-up. The chairman ordered his eldest son, Sungjun, to thoroughly investigate who had interfered with the bauxite import. Sungjun patted Hajun on the shoulder with a fake smile, promising to help. But Hajun didn't trust him. Stepping aside, Hajun made a few calls. He was sure that Sungjun was doing nothing, and worse, that he was the one behind the supply disruption. He decided to act on his own. He asked his secretary if it was true that the Australian mine had demanded a 50% price increase. Upon confirmation, he ordered her to accept their terms and prepare the contract. But then, an agitated subordinate burst into the office with bad news. The Australian mine had suddenly backed out of the deal without giving a reason. Hajun knew it wasn't a coincidence. His brother, who had just left for a business trip to Australia, was determined to stop him at any cost. But Hajun had no proof. He decided to find another mine, even an undeveloped one, and not let his brother win. At that moment, his secretary entered and informed him that his business trip to Indonesia was ready. He thanked her, taking the documents. He had information about a mine in Sumatra, and the APEC conference was the perfect cover. He was about to leave, but remembered a crucial detail: the bauxite purity tester. He couldn't take it with him. With enemies all around, the device could be stolen. He decided to leave it at the company and have someone bring it later. He needed an inconspicuous container, and his eyes fell on the green tumbler. He also needed a person who no one would pay attention to. Yeonhee was the perfect candidate. Snapping back to the island, Hajun replayed the events in his mind. Everything was going according to plan until Yeonhee showed up with the tumbler. Did someone notice he had chartered a helicopter? They tried to kill him in a foreign country to make it easier to hide the evidence and pass it off as an accident. But who? Could his brother Sungjun really hate him that much? He decided not to jump to conclusions. First, he had to get out of here, and then he would find the culprit. He shook his head and suddenly saw a huge pile of firewood in front of him. When had he gathered so much? For a second, he felt a surge of pride, anticipating praise from Ms. Mo. But the next moment, he was horrified with himself. Him, a CEO, excited about getting praised by a low-ranking secretary? What was wrong with him? He remembered her words, spoken with such confidence. He had never ceded leadership to anyone, and now he had to obey her? The thought brought a wry smile to his face. In the office, she was a shadow, but here, in the jungle, she shone, driven by a determination to survive. He felt gratitude towards her, and guilt, and he found her incredibly beautiful. He touched his shoulder, still feeling her weight. Everything felt so strange. This storm of emotions, the racing heartbeat, the heat in his body, and this new feeling, the desire not to let her down. All of it was unfamiliar to him. Meanwhile, Yeonhee was wandering the shore, looking for anything useful. She wasn't going to give up, and was carefully inspecting everything around her. And suddenly, her eyes landed on the wreckage of their helicopter, washed up on the shore. Getting closer, she saw that it was completely burned and smashed. If they had stayed inside, they would have surely died. She decided to look for anything useful inside. To her delight, she found an axe, a life jacket, and even a working flashlight. And also, a bottle of water. She remembered how Hajun had given her that water in the helicopter when she felt sick. He had told her to look up or look at him to distract her from her fear of heights. She had even thought to herself then, why did he have to be so handsome? Just his gaze made her feel breathless. She had a desperate urge to run her fingers through his hair whenever the wind blew it. She convinced herself it was just a natural reaction to an attractive man. But she had never felt anything like this towards him at the company. And then it hit her. It was all because he had given her CPR and stolen her first kiss. She firmly decided that she had to avoid all physical contact with him. Hajun looked at her in surprise when she returned. She was wearing different clothes! Yeonhee happily announced that she had found her bag. She explained she'd brought a change of clothes for rock climbing, and they had survived. His precious tumbler was also safe. Hajun asked about her phone. The phone was in the bag, but the battery was dead. She also told him she'd found the helicopter, and although it was wrecked, there were useful things inside. Hajun listened, thinking that since the helicopter had crashed into the water, the communication equipment was surely beyond repair. Yeonhee optimistically listed their findings and suggested they search for more in the morning. She smiled, happy that their situation seemed to be improving. Hajun looked at her with unconcealed admiration. He said she was incredible, and he couldn't believe she could smile like that in their predicament. Yeonhee thought that she had never seen him smile happily himself. He had grown up with everything, but maybe that was why he never felt truly happy. Hajun, having put his shoes back on, reminded her that he had gathered a lot of wood and asked when she was going to make the fire. Yeonhee pulled a lighter from her pocket and flicked it on. Hajun was furious. So that was her skill, starting a fire with a lighter? She just calmly replied that it worked. He asked where she got a lighter since she didn't smoke. She explained that when the kidnappers grabbed her, she got scared and grabbed the first thing she could on the jeep's floor. She had planned to burn through the ropes if they tied her up. Hajun was stunned by her foresight and by the fact that she had seriously thought he'd sent people to kidnap her. Yeonhee proudly declared that people who have gone through hardships are always prepared for danger. She recalled how their house would flood during rainy season and how a typhoon had once blown their roof off. Thanks to her preparedness, they now had a wonderful fire. She asked for his thoughts on seeing the leader personally make fire. Hajun sarcastically asked if he should give her a round of applause. Yeonhee sat by the fire and said that people become leaders to earn respect, and that he sometimes acted that way too. She reminded him of when he went viral on the internet. The arrogant way he treated the journalists made him look like a big shot. Realizing she might have gone too far, she tried to change the subject. But suddenly, the man said something about her lipstick. She didn't understand what he meant, and Hajun simply said that the color of her lipstick was pretty and suited her well. Yeonhee blushed beet red with embarrassment. She started making excuses, saying she just found the lipstick in her bag and her lips were dry. Hajun calmly replied that her natural lip color was already pretty, but this one was nice too because it had glitter. Her heart fluttered again at his unexpected compliment. To hide her awkwardness, she asked when they were going to go fishing. Suddenly, she remembered she had food. She pulled out containers with leftover in-flight meals. Hajun recognized the buns, yogurt, and fruit. Yeonhee proudly added that she had also grabbed 2 sugar packets, as well as forks, knives, and napkins. Hajun looked at her with a slight smile. He joked that she should have brought the whole plane with her. Yeonhee, slicing a bun, said that people who have known hunger don't waste food. She was about to add that he, having grown up in luxury, wouldn't understand, but his stomach rumbled loudly. She smiled and offered to share her food with him as comrades in misfortune. But Hajun, not waiting for an invitation, took his half of the bun, declaring that she wouldn't get to eat it all herself. She asked if it was tasty. He replied that the bread was stale and dry, but for some reason, it tasted better than any gourmet dish. Yeonhee watched him and smiled. They sat by the fire, silently finishing their modest dinner. Suddenly, Yeonhee excitedly called for him to look at the sunset. She said she had never seen anything so beautiful. Hajun agreed that it was a first for him, too. He added thoughtfully that the sunset looks that way because of the dust in the atmosphere. Yeonhee mentally chuckled. It was so like him to talk about dust while looking at such beauty. He explained that without dust, we wouldn't be able to see the sunset. And then he drew a parallel, asking if their lives weren't like that dust. Yeonhee picked up on his thought. She said that even though this moment felt useless and annoying, someday, looking back, it would seem beautiful to them. Haejun listened to her in silence, his expression softening. She noticed he was staring at her and shyly told him to look at the sunset. But he answered quietly that her eyes were now filled with the sunset, and that made them dazzling. Yeonhee's heart skipped another beat. He continued, calling her an amazing person, positive, brave, and able to inspire people. Yeonhee shyly brushed it off, saying he was flattering her. He reached out and gently touched her cheek. She flinched, but he admitted he didn't know what he was doing either. He just didn't like it when she lowered her head. He pulled his hand away and said there was something he had to tell her. Haejun apologized for them getting stranded, saying it was his fault. If he hadn't been so arrogant, this wouldn't have happened. He said he was reflecting on his actions and asked for her forgiveness. Yeonhee stared at him, amazed. Could a person really change so much in such a short time? The Kang Hajun she was seeing now was nothing like the one who always walked past her at the company. She smiled and said she forgave him. He asked with relief if she really meant it. She replied that it was all because of the sunset, and thanks to him, she was seeing the most beautiful sunset of her life. They sat side by side, silently watching the sun dip below the horizon. Later, as they settled down to sleep by the dying fire, Haejun asked if she was asleep. He reminded her of his promise to compensate her for all her troubles and told her to make any wish when they returned to Korea. Yeonhee thought about it. Her wish. No one had ever asked her that before. She said quietly that her wish was a house where her brother, Yeonhee, could live comfortably. Because of his wheelchair, they always had to live on the ground floor, on a busy street. Their apartment was dark and damp, full of dust and mold. Such an environment was bad for her brother, whose lungs had been weakened after the accident. She dreamed of a house filled with sunlight, where her brother could breathe fresh air whenever he wanted. She was tired of constantly moving and dealing with rental issues. She just wanted a home of their own. Hajun was about to say he could make it happen, but she cut him off, saying she wasn't asking him to buy her a house. She just wanted to say her wish out loud for the first time. But Hajun said firmly that he would buy her that house, because it was her wish and because he had promised to reward her. But first, he added, they had to survive and get out of here. And then, he asked her not to leave him behind. She was surprised. Why would he even think she would leave him? He replied that he knew he was a burden to her because he didn't know how to do anything. He asked her to be honest and admit that she had wanted to leave him behind. Yeonhee confessed that the thought had crossed her mind for a fleeting moment, but she would have never actually done it. She looked at him, sleeping on the dirty ground, and thought how humiliating it must be for such a proud man. She promised that she would never leave him, because a leader can't be a leader alone. Hajun, who had been pretending to be asleep, heard her words, and the warm smile touched his lips. Since they couldn't sleep, Yeonhee suggested playing a word chain game, with the loser getting a flick on the forehead. The game went on, until it was Yeonhee's turn to find a word starting with E. She was stumped, and Hajun prepared to deliver the flick. In a panic, she shouted, "Emoji!" But Hajun argued that the correct word was emoticon. She started arguing that her version was also correct, but he was adamant. She didn't calculate her strength and gave him such a hard flick that it looked like smoke was coming from his head. She apologized in horror, but he, rubbing his red forehead, did not accept her apology. With a vengeful smile, he announced it was his turn now. Yeonhee panicked. She had to find a word starting with K, and she knew that if she lost, his flick could be lethal. She couldn't think of anything, and Hajun already had his hand ready to strike. In desperation, she yelled out, "Kiss!" The word hung in the air, and the game came to an abrupt halt. His hand froze an inch from her forehead, and they just stared at each other, the tension between them becoming almost palpable. An awkward but warm silence hung in the air. They just looked at each other, and the tension of the moment slowly melted away. Hajun awkwardly suggested they go to sleep, and as if on command, they both turned away, breaking the moment. But sleeping on the hard ground was torture for his pampered body. His back immediately started aching in pain. He was terribly uncomfortable, but looking at Yeonhee, he saw she was sleeping peacefully, like a child. While she slept, dark thoughts flooded his mind. Someone had truly tried to kill him. The first suspect was his brother, Songjun. He recalled how his brother might have decided to kill him after Hajun found a new mine right after the bauxite imports were stopped. They were once very close. Even though they had different mothers, they always supported each other while studying abroad. But everything changed when Hajun's company began to grow, driving a wedge between them. Their father only added fuel to the fire, constantly humiliating Songjun and holding Hajun up as an example. He threw documents in his face, asking what he had achieved while Hajun built his empire alone. Hajun knew his father wasn't doing it out of love for him, but to stoke Songjun's inferiority complex. But in doing so, he had unwillingly become an enemy to his own brother. And yet, Hajun had his doubts. Even if his brother wanted him dead, he lacked the courage and meticulousness to orchestrate something like this. If not his brother, then who? Maybe that woman, Shim Jung-ah, his father's former secretary and now his stepmother. She had worked for him for over 30 years, patiently waiting for her moment, even hiding the fact that she had borne him a son. By getting rid of Hajun, it would be easier for her to dispose of Songjun too, clearing the path to the inheritance for her own son, Hyukjun. She was patient and ambitious enough for that. But would she take such a risk? If his father found out the truth, she would lose everything. There was one other option: his own father. The shareholders were increasingly supporting Hajun, and his father could see him as a threat to his position. But would he really go as far as to kill his own son? Hajun couldn't believe his father hated him that much. He grabbed his head, unable to believe he was suspecting his entire family. At that moment, a quiet groan interrupted his thoughts. He looked at Yeonhee and thought how horrible it would have been to be stranded here all alone. Even if someone wanted him dead, he had Ms. Mo by his side, helping him survive. She had promised not to leave him behind. Her groan came again. Hajun grew alarmed. Could she be sick? Her face contorted in pain. She wasn't here. She was trapped in a nightmare. In her dream, the day that changed everything came to life. A young Yeonhee begged her mom to let her sit by the window. Her parents tried to dissuade her, since she had sat there last time. But the girl threw a tantrum, refusing to give the seat to her younger brother, Yeonwoo. In the end, her father gave in. He placed his happy daughter in the coveted seat. Her mom sighed that they were spoiling her, but her dad just asked his daughter to let her brother have the seat next time. The girl pressed her face to the window in delight. She proudly asked her father, an aircraft mechanic, if he fixed big planes like these. To her, he was the best in the world. But soon the plane began its descent, and she drifted off to sleep. Her mother gently woke her when they had almost arrived. She smiled, and in that instant, a deafening roar erupted. An explosion tore the plane apart. Impact. A scream. Flames raged around them, and through the fire, she could hear cries for help. Yeonhee called for her mom, then her dad, but there was no answer. She saw her younger brother, Yeonwoo. He was crying, complaining that his legs hurt. She stared at him in horror, not understanding what had happened. But one thought was forever seared into her memory. She survived because she sat by the window. If she hadn't been so stubborn, if she had given the seat to her brother. Hajun shook her, pulling her from the nightmare. He touched her forehead. She was burning up. All her bravery had been just a mask. Suddenly, Yeonhee clung to him, sobbing and crying out her brother's name. Yeonwoo! Her body trembled in his arms. He felt her pain so acutely, it was as if a knife had been plunged into his own heart. He held her tighter, gently patting her back, trying to soothe her. She was crying even in her sleep. She finally calmed down and stopped shaking, but continued to sleep in his arms. He sighed in relief, but then froze. In her sleep, Yeonhee began to move, pressing herself even closer to him. Hajun couldn't believe what was happening. In such a critical situation, his body was responding to his secretary. His heart began to pound wildly. Could it be he had feelings for Ms. Mo? This was driving him crazy. This was no time for such thoughts. If she woke up now, she would misunderstand everything. He began to shake her gently. He desperately pleaded for her to wake up. Finally, she opened her eyes, and he breathed a sigh of relief. He noticed her cheeks were wet and asked if she had been crying. But Yeonhee denied it, still confused about what was happening. Realizing she was sitting on his lap, Yeonhee screamed and pushed him away. She frantically asked what he had been doing while she slept. Hajun calmly replied that he hadn't done anything. She was the one who had lunged at him. He told her she was having a nightmare, sweating and talking in her sleep, and asked who Yeonwoo was. Yeonhee, calming down a bit, answered that it was her younger brother, and it was for his sake that she had to survive and return home. Hajun envied their close relationship. But Yeonhee just scoffed, saying he was the one to be envied, the son of a chairman and the brother of a CEO. His expression darkened. He suggested she come closer to the fire and warm up after her cold sweat. But the fire was starting to die down. Yeonhee guessed it was because of the humidity. They couldn't let it go out. Hajun decided to try and save the flame. He desperately blew on the smoldering embers, trying to reignite them. He pleaded with the fire to keep burning. And he succeeded. The flame flared up with renewed strength, and Hajun looked proudly at Yeonhee. She clapped for him, surprised at how quickly he was adapting. Hajun smugly promised to surprise her even more. He was determined to prove she was wrong for calling him useless. But just then, the first drops of rain fell from the sky. Soon, a downpour drenched them, and they took shelter under the helicopter wreckage. Hajun took off his soaked shirt. He explained that he had tried his best, but didn't expect it to rain. He offered her his wrung-out shirt, but Yeonhee couldn't take her eyes off his body. She thought it was no wonder he had such a physique. He always took great care of himself. Yeonhee said she was fine and suggested he put the shirt on so he wouldn't get cold. But he refused, saying a wet shirt would only make him colder. And immediately, A shiver ran through him from the cold. He couldn't understand why it was so cold in the tropics. They both sat, hugging their shoulders. Yeonhee thought ironically that his spectacular body was of no use in this situation. Hajun panicked that they might freeze to death. Yeonhee figured he just wasn't used to the cold, having always lived in warmth. For her, this temperature was nothing. She estimated it was about 18 degrees Celsius, 64 degrees Fahrenheit, and curled up to keep from catching a cold. Hajun didn't want to show his weakness, but he couldn't take it anymore. He covered his face with his hands, apologizing for his uselessness. Yeonhee asked in shock if he was crying. She moved closer and offered him a shoulder to cry on, promising not to tell anyone. But Hajun, embarrassed, claimed his tears wouldn't come out because it was too cold. After a moment's thought, Yeonhee decided on a drastic measure. She asked him not to get her wrong. She said she was doing it only for survival and asked him to just not think about it. And with that, she hugged him from behind to warm him with her body. Hajun was shocked, but Yeonhee calmly told him to sleep, as it would be warmer when the sun rose. She explained that this was the best she could do as the leader and asked him to think of her as a heater. But Hajun stopped her, saying this wasn't right. Yeonhee asked if he was uncomfortable. He lifted her up and sat her on his lap, facing him, before hugging her tightly. He explained that he liked to do things properly. Yeonhee panicked at such an intimate position. But Hajun insisted they needed to sit like this to keep warm. Her heart pounded in her chest. He intertwined their fingers. He reminded her that they had agreed to forget everything. Their genders, their status as boss and secretary, their age difference. He smiled and promised it would get warmer soon. Yeonhee's heart was racing, but at the same time, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She didn't understand how he could have gotten so warm so quickly, but his warmth was melting away all her negative feelings. She mentally ordered herself to get a grip. The next day, she tried to convince herself that her attraction to Hajun was a natural reaction, since he was handsome and had become more caring. But then she reminded herself that in the jungle, he was still completely useless. Just then, Hajun himself appeared holding 2 coconuts. He explained that he found them under the palm trees after the storm. Yeonhee immediately took back her words about him being useless. They enjoyed the coconut flesh, but their city habits were showing. Yeonhee was craving an Americano. And then their fantasies ran wild. Tteokbokki, steak with truffle oil, dumplings, chicken. Hajun even suggested they look for bird eggs because he was dying for some fried eggs. Yeonhee smiled, declared she was quitting as his secretary again, and as the leader, she was ordering him to gather more coconuts. Hajun immediately jumped to his feet, ready to obey his leader's command. But he quickly added that he wouldn't accept her resignation and would promote her to assistant manager when they got back to Seoul. Yeonhee's eyes lit up with joy. He promised her a big bonus and to count this time as office hours. All he asked in return was for her to keep smiling like that and stay by his side. Yeonhee understood he meant stay with him in the jungle, and she happily agreed. Hajun went off to get coconuts, while Yeonhee decided to catch some fish. In the end, Hajun tended the fire, while Yeonhee returned with a bountiful catch. She had caught not only fish, but also various shellfish. Hajun was shocked that she had actually managed to catch all of this. He admiringly called her a competent employee and decided to promote her straight to manager. Yeonhee playfully accepted. The day grew hotter and hazier. Yeonhee was suffering from the heat. Hajun noticed and suggested they take a break. She was surprised by his perceptiveness, but he immediately added that he was just worried she might collapse. It turned out he was the one who was tired. They sat down in the shade. Hajun complained about the heat, but Yeonhee replied that it was still better than sleeping in a house without windows in the summer. He didn't get the joke and suggested just turning on the AC, earning him a death glare. She then decided to recite a poem written by a child from a rich family. It described how all the servants in the house were poor, and the child wondered when their family would become rich. Yeonhee concluded with a smile that since her secretary was poor, he couldn't be that rich either. Hajun dryly replied that it wasn't funny. Yeonhee retorted that his joke about the air conditioner wasn't funny either. Hajun sighed heavily, wiping away sweat. Yeonhee noticed how much he was struggling. He hadn't even slept well the previous night. She decided to find something nutritious for him and prepared to go look for fruit alone so they wouldn't get lost again. To keep him from following her, she asked him to stay and sing her a song. Hajun flatly refused, claiming he couldn't remember the last time he sang and had even skipped his preschool talent show to avoid embarrassment. But Yeonhee threatened to go to Jakarta by herself, and he had to agree immediately. As she was leaving, she took out a small axe. When he asked why, she said it was for protection against wild animals. Hajun jumped up in a panic, unable to believe there were wild animals there. He declared that she couldn't handle them alone and decided to go with her. But then he imagined how many bugs would be swarming around the sweet fruit, and he flinched. Yeonhee started listing them off. Ants, spiders, centipedes, scorpions. Hajun immediately changed his mind and, keeping his distance, wished her a safe trip. But Yeonhee decided to tease him and shouted that she saw a bug. Hajun leaped up in terror. He started frantically shaking himself off, stomping and waving his arms. He realized she was teasing him, but Yeonhee, laughing, pointed to his shoulder. A large, leaf-like bug was sitting there. She told him to stay still and slowly reached for the insect. Hajun stopped her, worried the bug might be poisonous. He offered to remove it with his own hand. He admitted the mere thought of touching it gave him the shivers, but he would hate himself even more if she got hurt. Yeonhee assured him the bug wasn't poisonous, and even if it was, her job as a secretary was to protect him. But Hajun insisted it was his fault they were here, and he had to take responsibility. She started to remind him that she'd already forgiven him. But just then, the bug on his shoulder twitched. Yeonhee feared that if the bug was poisonous, Hajun would be in danger. Without a second thought, she pressed herself against him and blew hard on the bug, sending it flying off her boss's shoulder. She happily announced that the bug was gone. Hajun looked at her with an unreadable expression. He stopped her before she could say anything. He gently touched her cheek and said she shouldn't have done that, and slowly leaned in to kiss her. Her heart hammered as she closed her eyes in anticipation. But instead of a kiss, he simply blew something out of her hair. It turned out the bug from his shoulder had flown onto her. He asked with a smirk why she had closed her eyes. Was she scared of the bug? Yeonhee exploded with embarrassment and fury, shouting that he would have been scared too if he were in her shoes. She stormed off in anger. Hajun was baffled as to why she was mad, since he had chased away the scary bug. He realized she was genuinely upset. She demanded that he sing as promised, loudly. He sighed, reminding her that leaders don't just give orders, but he complied. Yeonhee listened to him sing and wondered why he had been so reluctant since he had a good voice. The choice of song, however, was odd. She couldn't believe he was singing a sad love ballad on such a hot day. She had always thought of him as a workaholic with no interest in dating. But could it be that he also had someone he loved? Lost in thought, she walked on, realizing that at his age, he must have been in relationships. She knew he wasn't heartless and wondered how gentle he must have been with someone he loved. The thought sent a pang through her heart. She was startled. What was that pain? Was it an after effect of the crash? She decided she would definitely get a checkup when she got home and file for workers' compensation. When she returned, Hajun was shocked by the abundance of fruit she had brought back. There was a pineapple, papaya, and mango. But the biggest surprise was coffee beans. Hajun was touched beyond words. She proudly declared that even here, she was still his secretary and was obligated to serve him coffee. And for the cherry on top, she handed him his beloved tumbler. But his expression was strange. An idea suddenly dawned on Yeonhee. She solemnly promised that his lips were sealed and swore to take the secret of his attachment to the tumbler to her grave. Hajun stared blankly at her bizarre performance. He finally cut her off, saying he didn't need the tumbler for coffee. It was an electronic tool that measured bauxite purity on the spot. Yeonhee froze. Bauxite? The mineral that the company was having import issues with? So it wasn't just a tumbler. She asked why he had told her to bring it. He replied that he had received information about a mine in Sumatra. So that's where he was flying to on the helicopter. He hadn't told anyone to keep the location a secret. It all made sense now. The tumbler was the key to saving the company, but why did he entrust such an important item to her? She recalled that they had never spoken before, yet he knew her name and phone number. Could it be that he had noticed how good she was at her job? She asked hopefully if he had given her this task because he thought highly of her skills. She had always believed that someone would one day acknowledge her hard work, but she never thought that person would be Mr. Kang. She praised him, saying he was not only a genius developer, but also a good judge of character. And she promised to work even harder once they were back in Seoul. Hajun clenched his fist, feeling a wave of guilt. He decided he had to tell her the truth. He explained that he couldn't let anyone know about his trip to the mine. So he decided to entrust the important task to her, because the other employees simply didn't notice her and wouldn't pay her any mind. He apologized. Yeonhee coldly replied that he didn't need to apologize for the fact that she was an outcast. She understood his logic perfectly. If he needed an unnoticeable employee, she was the perfect fit. No one would believe she could be entrusted with something important. He had made a rational decision for the company's sake. But for some reason, her whole body ached, and it became hard to breathe. She asked why he hadn't just sent her back then, but took her in the helicopter. He replied that he wanted to show her the mine so she'd understand the task's importance, afraid she would just hand over the tumbler and leave. He was afraid she would think of herself as unimportant. He wanted to help improve her self-esteem, but things had turned out this way. Yeonhee snapped, asking why he even thought she had low self-esteem. She thought he was different. She believed the ones at fault were those who ignored her because of her background, not her. She didn't need anyone to boost her self-esteem. Hajun was at a loss for words. She told him that if he thought she was losing her self-respect by doing menial tasks, he was greatly mistaken. Secretaries exist to make their bosses shine. They work in the shadows. She asked how he intended to boost her self-esteem when she had diligently performed her duties for 2 years, even restocking the toilet paper in his private restroom, and never once found it demeaning. Hajun was stunned. Yeonhee bowed. She stated that a cleaner doesn't have low self-esteem because of their job, and that judging people based on their background is something only scumbags would do. She thought he wasn't that kind of person. She was disappointed. With those words, she turned and walked away. Hajun was left alone with all their belongings. She turned back and ordered him to bring every single thing with him. He asked her to walk slowly, but she just told him to hurry up. He breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that at least she wasn't leaving him behind. But how could he make amends? What was the best way to calm down an angry woman? He regretted working all the time instead of dating and ran after her. That evening, she announced they were sleeping here and told him to start a fire while she gathered banana leaves. He meekly offered to sing for her to make up for it, but she coldly refused. All he could do was tell her to be careful. He realized she was really angry. He wanted to talk and make up before bed, but he saw that she had made her bed very far away from him. The distance between them was vast. She started making coffee. He suggested she rest, but she insisted she wanted to drink it. He offered to help, but she cut him off, saying there was nothing he could do. He thought sadly that she didn't even want to talk to him. He thought their shared experience would bring them closer, but instead, a wall of awkwardness had grown between them. He knew it was his fault and tried to reconnect, asking if the baked cassava was good. She coldly told him to try it himself. He took a bite, not even knowing what it tasted like. He felt like he was going to get indigestion from the stress. Yeonhee then announced she was tired and going to bed. He was surprised it was so early. He asked if they were going to play the word chain game, but she just snapped that she was tired. He didn't give up and suggested she sleep in his spot, saying it was warmer there. She just gave him a death glare. She couldn't believe he had tried to help her self-esteem out of pity for her, a poor scholarship student and a shadow in the office. She understood he felt guilty, but as the object of his pity, she found the situation ridiculous and draining. She told him to stop apologizing and evaluating her by his standards. She was just doing her best to live, and he didn't know everything about her. He realized he had hurt her. In the middle of the night, she woke up and didn't see him nearby. He wasn't at the camp. She started calling his name in a panic. But the only response was silence and the eerie sounds of the jungle. She grabbed a torch, determined to find him. Doubts plagued her. What if they missed each other? What if she got lost? What would happen to the helpless Hajun all alone? Casting aside her fear, she screamed his name with all her might. She yelled again and again, worried because he knew nothing about surviving in the jungle. She wondered if he had left because she was mad, or if he was trying to scare her as payback. But she immediately dismissed the thought. He wasn't the type to stoop so low. She regretted not being able to control her anger and explain why she was upset. She was simply embarrassed that he, her boss, knew how she was ignored at the office. And it hurt that he, of all people, pitied her. She had pretended to be strong because she was afraid of looking pathetic in his eyes. She screamed his name again. Realizing that shouting was useless, she decided to search for him, leaving marks with her knife along the way. Her face was a mask of determination and fear. She ran out onto the beach and saw him. He was walking along the shore, carrying his belongings. Bare feet stepped onto the cool night sand. It was Hajun, who had decided to do something special. Clutching a black bag in his hand, he smiled with hope, wondering if Ms. Mo would like his surprise. But his thoughts were interrupted by a desperate cry calling his name. His eyes widened with surprise and a hint of alarm. Yeonhee ran toward him, dropping the axe and the makeshift torch. She bolted out of the shelter and ran toward him, her face twisted with panic. Hajun froze, completely at a loss for what was happening. She ran up and started pounding on his chest, her blows filled with both fear and relief. Stunned, he could only ask why she wasn't asleep. With tears in her eyes, she yelled that he should have told her where he was going. Her voice broke with overwhelming emotion. His initial shock gave way to sincere concern. He gently took her by the wrists, guessing she'd had a nightmare. Yeonhee's panic turned to bewilderment when she noticed his wet clothes. She demanded to know where he had been and why he was soaked. Instead of words, Hajun silently held out the black bag to her. Inside was a mountain of seashells. He quietly explained that he had gathered them for her, hoping it would lift her spirits. A timid, almost shy smile appeared on his face. He remembered how she had complained about being tired after fishing that morning, so he decided to try it himself to make her happy. Her anger instantly vanished, replaced by a wave of warmth and guilt. She mumbled an apology, realizing how wrong she had been about him. Hajun's smile faded. He bitterly admitted that she was right. He wasn't the kind of person worthy of trying to boost her self-esteem. Her heart ached at his words. She turned away, stunned by a sudden realization. She liked him so much, she was about to go crazy. He continued, his voice laced with frustration at his own helplessness. If they were in Seoul, he could buy her anything, a house or even an entire building. But here, on this deserted island, this humble gift was the only thing he could offer. She looked at him, her heart fluttering. Suddenly, her anxiety took over again. She snatched the bag from him, angrily asking who told him to do something so foolish. Yeonhee scolded him, reminding him how dangerous it was to go into the ocean at night. He could have drowned if he'd gone too far from the shore. A faint smile returned to his face. He asked if she was worried about him. Flustered, she snapped that she was just doing her duty as the leader and was responsible for her subordinate. She said she didn't need a subordinate who wouldn't listen to her. He kept smiling, saying all he wanted was to make her happy. Yeonhee was touched to the core. She didn't know what to think as she looked at this serious, yet so caring man. He even offered to climb a tree if it would make her happy. In response, she just wondered why he was willing to do anything for someone like her. Noticing her confusion, Hajun grew worried, thinking he had done something wrong again. He apologized, though he didn't know for what, and asked her to look at him. His hand gently touched her cheek. Her heart beat faster at his touch. His gaze was filled with such tenderness and confusion. But she reflexively pushed his hand away, ordering him not to do that. Composing herself, she calmly explained that he had gotten hurt when he recklessly went into the water without any preparation. She gently took his injured hand, examining the scratches from the coral. She sat by the fire, tending to his wounds, and the atmosphere between them grew tense. She strictly ordered him not to do anything again without her permission, and most importantly, to never disappear without saying anything. Relief and warmth showed on his face. He realized she had genuinely been worried about him, and he liked the feeling. Yeonhee, however, was embarrassed by his perceptiveness. She squeezed his hand hard, making him cry out in pain. She tried to justify herself, saying she was only worried because her CEO, who had promised her a promotion, had suddenly vanished. Asking what else she had to worry about, she let go of his hand and told him to go to sleep. Hajun was left alone, lamenting that his attempt to make amends with the seashells seemed to have only made her angrier. The cold wind made him shiver. It looked like it was going to rain again. His first thought was that Ms. Mo would get cold. He immediately started adding more wood to the fire to make it hotter. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind caught the sparks and threw them right onto the sleeping Yeonhee. The flames instantly engulfed her hair. Hajun screamed her name in horror, watching the fire consume her hair. Without a second's hesitation, he threw himself on top of her, smothering the flames with his body. He gritted his teeth in pain as the fire spread to his back. Yeonhee, coming to her senses, frantically asked if he was okay and said she could smell something burning. He cried out from the searing pain in his back when she touched his shirt. She immediately lifted his shirt and saw a terrible burn covering his entire back. She couldn't believe her eyes. Yeonhee, hugging him from behind, tried to calm him down, saying that luckily the burn wasn't serious, but Hajun thought otherwise. He asked her to look closer, insisting that he had at least a third-degree burn. He dramatically asked if he was dying. With a slight smirk, Yeonhee advised him not to exaggerate. Looking at her smile, he thought how beautiful she was. He wished she would stop being angry and always smile like that. He quietly called her name. Then he asked if he looked pathetic in her eyes, which greatly surprised her. He confessed that he had always been on top of his game, but now he felt completely worthless. What good was his money in the jungle? He couldn't climb a tree or catch a fish. He couldn't do anything on his own. He asked if she was being so kind to him because she pitied him. Yeonhee was indignant, calling his words nonsense. She assured him that he wasn't pathetic at all, and she had her own reasons for treating him well. He clutched his head, admitting that at first he felt guilty because it was his fault they were in this mess. But now, he said, he had a completely different reason for being kind to her. He gently touched her cheek and confessed that the reason was that she was very beautiful. Embarrassed by his own words, he continued. He, Kang Hajun, was acting this way because he liked Mo Yeonhee. Her heart stopped at this direct and sincere confession. He told her how scared he was gathering seashells in the sea at night without turning on his flashlight to save the battery. But he didn't want to stop because he was thinking about how happy she would be. He was happy that the bag didn't tear, even when he tripped on a coral reef and cut his hands until they bled. The first drops of rain fell onto the sand. He asked her what he was supposed to do with his feelings now. At that moment, a heavy downpour began, as if the heavens were crying with them. The rain quickly extinguished the fire, leaving them in darkness and cold. Raindrops mixed with the tears on his cheeks. Yeonhee was also crying, overwhelmed by his confession. She didn't understand where his directness came from. Was it because he grew up wanting for nothing? Or because he had never been rejected? What was she supposed to do? All the men who had been interested in her ran away as soon as they learned about her past. But it never hurt because she never gave her heart to anyone. She was used to enduring everything and not giving in to her emotions. Otherwise, her emotional wounds would have broken her long ago. Haiju noticed that she had called him by his name, and he liked it. Yeonhee said his feelings were completely natural right now. She gave a strange example. If only one man and one woman were left on Earth, would humanity die out? She explained that their instincts wouldn't let that happen. Now that it was just the two of them on the island, it was perfectly normal to have these feelings. With a forced smile, Yeonhee replied that such emotions weren't important, and he shouldn't think too much about it. According to her, what they should be worrying about now was how they would spend this cold, rainy night. He looked at her in silence, his face expressing the pain and disappointment her words caused. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he agreed that since it was an order from the leader, he would have to obey. They stood in the pouring rain. He asked her to hold the flashlight, saying he would do everything himself. But Yeonhee objected. With his injured hand and burned back, he shouldn't be holding an axe. It would be better if she did it herself. He gently took the axe from her, reminding her that she herself had told him to obey the leader's orders. But he couldn't hold back any longer because it hurt him to watch her struggle. Yeonhee looked at him silently, then said firmly that her feelings had nothing to do with survival instincts. He loves Yeonhee as a person. As a woman, she is incredibly attractive. With those words, he struck the tree hard with the axe. He admired her courage, positivity, and audacity. That's what made her beautiful in his eyes. He confessed that the last 2 days spent with her had been the happiest moments of his life. There was a dull thud of the axe against the tree trunk. A huge palm leaf crashed to the ground. Hajun, breathing heavily, wiped the sweat from his forehead. Yeonhee looked at him, her eyes full of tears. She thanked him for his kindness. She also thought he was a good person, but unfortunately, she had no feelings for him. He looked her in the eyes and said firmly that she was lying. He compared her feelings to this downpour. No matter how hard it rained, the sky would eventually clear up as if nothing had happened. With tears in her eyes, Yeonhee asked him to control his emotions. She declared that this was her final answer. In the rain, they began to build a shelter out of palm leaves. Hajun was disappointed. He thought she was a rational person, but apparently he was wrong. He asked if she was planning to build 2 huts to sleep separately in such cold weather. Yeonhee replied that it wasn't a problem for her, but it was a problem for him. He complained that his hand was injured, his back was burned, and he wasn't feeling well. He placed a hand over his heart, hinting at his emotional pain. He said that this spot hurt the most. Yeonhee couldn't take it anymore and ordered him to stop arguing, stating that it was an order from the leader. She tried to set up a leaf, but it kept falling. She didn't understand what she was doing wrong. Suddenly, she heard Hajun's footsteps very close by. And then her body crashed into something warm and solid. It was Hajun, who had stepped behind her to support both her and the structure. Embarrassed, Yeonhee immediately stepped back, putting some distance between them. He told her to rest and offered his help, explaining that the support pole needed to be sturdy enough. She protested, but he insisted, not understanding her stubbornness. He said he knew she was pushing him away to protect herself. But right now, she was one of the people he had to protect. He told her to rest and said he would build his hut alone. She turned away and coldly wished him good luck. Haijun watched her go with a pained expression. By morning, the rain had stopped, and the sun filled the jungle with light. Yeonhee woke up and stretched. She was glad she had built the hut. It was hard, but definitely better than sleeping on the wet sand. She peeked outside to check on Hajun, and what she saw left her in shock. His hut had collapsed. A trembling hand stuck out from under the pile of leaves. She called his name in a panic. She rushed to him, horrified, asking if he had spent the whole night like this. Why hadn't he woken her up? Her eyes widened in terror. She touched his forehead and realized he had a high fever. He was literally burning up. She tried to lift him, but he was unconscious. In his delirium, he mumbled that this wouldn't have happened if they hadn't slept in separate huts. Yeonhee froze in an awkward silence. She muttered that if anyone heard, they would get the wrong idea. But then she cut herself off. There was no one around. She laid him down on a makeshift bed on the beach. To bring down the fever, she started unbuttoning his shirt to wipe him down. But her hand froze halfway. Under his shirt was a chiseled six-pack, glistening in the sun. She coughed in embarrassment, and thinking to herself that it was just a washboard, continued to wipe him down with a damp cloth. Later, she tried to feed him pineapple, yelling that if he didn't eat, he would get worse. He opened his eyes and asked in a weak voice if she was worried about him. Yeonhee was momentarily at a loss for words. She angrily declared that it would be even harder for her if his condition worsened, and practically shoved a piece of pineapple into his mouth. He winced from the acidity, but she told him to bear with it, since this was the only place to try organic pineapples. Despite the fever and the sour taste, he smiled happily. Yeonhee didn't understand how he could smile like that with such a high temperature. He reflected that, despite the terrible situation, he was happy. He was incredibly happy that she was there with him. Her heart skipped a beat at his words. He confessed that until this moment, he hadn't been living, just existing, as if he were breathing but not feeling alive. He considered a lonely life, full of responsibility for thousands of people, to be normal, because he was obsessed with success. But now, everything had changed, because she, Yeonhee, had taught him how to love. He gently touched her face, looking into her eyes with a warmth she had never seen before. The thought that she felt the same way flashed through her mind. She loved him too, Mr. Kang. But was it right to express these feelings? Doubts raced through her head. After all, Kang Hajun was her boss, and she was just his secretary. She set aside the makeshift bowl of pineapples. She said she didn't want to waste time. The only thing on her mind was how to get home safely. He asked what she would do if he told her he was in so much pain he couldn't even walk. She coldly replied that she would go to Jakarta alone then. Even if he died, they couldn't both perish. She added that she would be sad, but she would go on with her life. He asked her to say it while looking him in the eyes. Her gaze faltered. Hajun smirked. She couldn't even lie properly. He said he could see right through her. She was worried, trembling, and upset. His words were affecting her. And people, he said, call that love. Yeonhee didn't know what to say. She blurted out that love can't feed you and turned away. His smile faded, but he didn't give up. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Then he pulled her closer. He wrapped her in a tight embrace. She was stunned, but he explained that she needed comfort. He guessed that she had been fighting alone for too long. She couldn't complain, couldn't cry, couldn't be weak. He whispered that she must have been very lonely. He agreed that love might not feed you, but people cannot live on bread alone. Sometimes, comfort is more important than food. He reminded her how they had comforted each other with their warmth on their first night on the island. They had gone through such hardships together, so why did she still consider herself alone? He was here, right beside her, her eyes filled with tears. Gathering her last bit of strength, she pushed him away. She threatened that if he continued, she would leave him. Yeonhee said he had confessed his feelings to her after only knowing her for a few days. And comfort from such a person didn't make her feel any better. Hajun looked at her with quiet acceptance and understanding. Then he made a shocking announcement. They had actually met 7 years ago. He told her how a young girl had ruined his Christmas by getting on his nerves. And when he wondered why he felt so bad, he realized he was jealous. Because she was smiling. He, the owner of so many things, couldn't even smile. His heart was empty. He wondered how a girl with no parents or money, who depended on a scholarship from his company, could smile so brightly. That girl grew up and became his secretary. And she still smiled just as brightly, even when her boss sent her on a foolish errand to the jungle. Her smile was so bright that it made him, a man who had never really smiled, want to smile with her. He said there was something he had wanted to tell her for the past 7 years. Dropping to one knee, he confessed, "I've missed you, Ms. Mo." Meanwhile, in Seoul, at Chairman Kang's house, a scandal was brewing. The chairman was shouting in a rage, unable to believe that his son Hajun had disappeared. His assistant reported that, according to Ms. Han, Hajun had stepped out for some fresh air before the reception and hadn't been seen since. The chairman suspected he had been kidnapped. The assistant replied that they weren't sure yet. The reception was on Saturday afternoon. The chairman slammed his cup on the table in fury. He yelled, asking why he was only being told about this now, 3 days later. The assistant tried to explain that Ms. Han had been conducting the search herself and only contacted him last night, but the chairman wouldn't listen. He ordered the security team from the strategic planning department to be dispatched immediately. At that moment, the chairman's eldest son, Sungjun, entered the office and asked if it was true that Hajun was missing. His father irritably asked how he knew. Sungjun replied that he had overheard the conversation. The chairman told him to stay out of it, but Sungjun insisted that he wanted to fly to Indonesia immediately. His father cut him off sharply, ordering him to stay away from this and not to make him repeat himself. Sungjun fell silent, his face showing his disappointment. When he left, the chairman contemptuously called him a pathetic fool. He thought to himself that Sungjun was just pretending to be worried when he was actually behind Hajun's disappearance. His wife, Mrs. Jung, entered the room and asked if he thought Sungjun was responsible for Hajun's disappearance. He reminded him that it was Sungjun who had obstructed the bauxite imports and failed to secure the contract with the Australian mine. But Mrs. Jung argued that Sungjun wasn't that evil and was too sensitive for something like this. He asked his wife why she was defending Sungjun, who didn't even call her mother. She replied that she didn't need him to. The chairman said that Hajun had brought this on himself, as he had been warned not to stick his neck out. Mrs. Jung reproached her husband for his lack of fatherly love, but he just scoffed, doubting that Hajun even saw him as a father. He was sure that none of this would have happened if Hajun had listened to him and compromised. Suddenly, the youngest son burst into the room. He excitedly asked if it was true that his brother Hajun was missing. His mother scolded him for his rudeness, but immediately softened, explaining to her husband that the boy was just in shock. She told her youngest son to go upstairs, as his father was already upset. She added that he couldn't help anyway. Mrs. Young practically pushed him out of the room. She told her husband that he was still a child and was worried about his brother. The chairman suggested that she go comfort him. He said he needed to discuss business with Mr. Choi. He added that even though she was Hajun's mother, it was better for her to know as little as possible about this matter. She asked anxiously if he had any proof of Sung-jun's involvement, but he cut her off rudely. The chairman wearily rubbed his temples. Mrs. Jung left, saying she would call Mr. Choi back. Meanwhile, the assistant was reporting that Mr. Kang had left the hotel in Jakarta alone on Saturday at noon. And even stranger, one of the secretaries from Hain Company hadn't shown up for work. The assistant reminded the chairman that this was the same scholarship student from the Jugang group who had made him laugh with her poem at the charity gala. The chairman remembered her, the girl who had shouted, "3 cheers for the Jugang group!" He asked if they had found out why she hadn't come to work. Mr. Park from the secretariat suggested she had quit, but the chairman doubted that such a diligent girl would leave without notice. The assistant agreed and said the information department had started an investigation. It turned out that this secretary had flown to Jakarta on a 10 p.m. flight on Friday. The chairman pondered. Hajun left at noon. Could he have gone after her? He clenched his fist and asked for the girl's name. Yeonhee, sir. The chairman furiously ordered them to find out everything about her immediately. Meanwhile, on the island, Yeonhee was walking along the beach. She tried to convince herself to cast aside her feelings, as they wouldn't help them survive. But Hajun's words about missing her for 7 years kept replaying in her mind. She thought it was ridiculous to call their meeting fate. If it were fate, he would have treated her well from the very beginning of her time at the company. She turned around, wondering if he was following her. But she immediately scolded herself, ordering herself to stop thinking and worrying about him. She looked at the sun and thought about how short the day seemed when they walked together. It was easy to say they should rely on each other, but they lived in different worlds. Kang Hajun, the CEO of a global company, the second son of the chairman of the Jugang group. And she, just a junior secretary who couldn't even step on his shadow. She begged him to stop trying to change her mind, because it was already too hard for her. Yeonhee trudged wearily across the scorched earth. Her face expressed despair. She reached a cliff and realized it was a dead end. In desperation, she fell to her knees. Hajun silently approached from behind. He sighed heavily, seeing her condition. She jumped up, yelling that he had promised a village but had led her to a dead end. He calmly suggested they build a fire and a hut. She started to worry about her brother Yeonhee, whom she hadn't been able to contact for days. Hajun assured her that she didn't need to worry about her brother, because by now, Yeonhee would already know she was in Jakarta. She was shocked, as she hadn't told anyone about the trip. Hajun explained that since he didn't show up for the demonstration, Miss Han would have started looking for him and reported him missing to the Jugang group. And that meant the chairman was also aware. The Jugang group would have immediately started official procedures. Since he was the chairman's son, his father would have started his own search through his chief secretary, and it was only a matter of time before they discovered her absence from work. By now, they had probably already completed a full background check on her. She asked in horror if they had checked her credit cards and phone records. He guessed they might have even searched her home. She didn't understand why they would do that. Hajun explained. A beautiful secretary and a young CEO disappeared together. They could imagine anything, up to a secret affair and an elopement. She exclaimed that it was impossible. He suggested that maybe he was the one who ran away from an arranged marriage. She asked suspiciously if he was engaged. He replied that he wasn't, at least not before coming to Jakarta. She didn't understand what he was talking about. He admitted that his family had chosen a woman for him, but he had no intention of marrying her. Yeonhee was furious. So he confessed his feelings to her while having a fiancé? But she immediately stopped herself. She had rejected him, so she had no right to be angry. She asked if they would investigate her younger brother, too. Hajun nodded, assuring her that someone had likely been assigned to look after and care for him. He teased her, saying that from her brother's perspective, the situation of his beautiful sister staying single just to take care of him was far more worrying. He suggested that Yeonhee would be happy if the people from Jugang asked him if he knew his sister was dating Kang Hajun. Yeonhee argued that he wouldn't be happy. Hajun, however, said that if he were in her brother's shoes, he would be glad his sister had found someone she loved. She yelled in a panic that she didn't love him. He replied with a smirk, "Whatever you say." She insisted she was serious, and he agreed not to pressure her anymore. But he promised that he would make it so she could no longer hide her feelings from him. Yeonhee took a step back, slipped, and started to fall. He caught her, and they froze in a pose that resembled a dance. He said with a smile that her ability to hide her feelings had its limits, and that she wasn't very good at hiding them anyway. He easily lifted her into his arms, saying she needed to rest. From now on, he would take care of everything. She looked at him, and her heart melted. That night, they sat by the fire. Yeonhee thought about how much he had changed. This was no longer the Kang Hajun she knew. Now he knew how to start a fire, build a hut, and find food. Since they couldn't sleep, he suggested playing a word game. They started playing hut, table, land, hammock, until he said kiss. She froze, blushing. He persistently poked her in the side, repeating, "Kiss." Turning away, she mumbled, "Silk." But he said kiss again. She jumped up, protesting that he had already used that word. He asked innocently, "When?" She tried to explain that she didn't mean that kind of kiss, but he told her to present her forehead for a flick. She squeezed her eyes shut in anticipation. But instead of a flick, she felt the gentle touch of his hand. He whispered that a kiss was better than a flick, wasn't it? She flushed to the tips of her ears. They bickered a little more before going to sleep. Soon, she fell asleep. He looked at her sleeping face with tenderness. He left the hut, wondering what they should do next. If there was no village here, it meant they had crashed near the island of Sumatra. He guessed that the upper reaches of the river might be part of a national park. Tomorrow would be the 4th day of their disappearance. The security team must have already found the helicopter's takeoff location, but identifying the crash site via satellite would take another 2 days. Returning to the crash site was dangerous. The people who tried to kill him might be there. That meant the only way out was through the jungle. But he worried if Ms. Mo could handle such a journey. She had been so disheartened when they didn't find the village and had barely eaten anything. He looked ahead with determination. In the morning, Yeonhee woke up to a delicious smell. She had been dreaming of mountains of boiled crabs and shrimp. Opening her eyes, she saw Hajun, covered in soot, holding out a freshly cooked breakfast to her. He explained that there was a river mouth nearby, so he had managed to catch a lot of crabs and shrimp. Her mouth watered at the mere sight of it. She took a bite and was ecstatic, saying it was incredibly delicious. She offered him some, but he refused, telling her to eat it all herself. She looked at him with concern. He was covered in mud and soot. She thought about how hard it must have been for him, since he had never fished before. She chided him, saying he could have asked her to come with him, but he replied that from now on, she wouldn't lift a finger. He would do everything for her. She asked if he wanted to be the leader now. He said she could remain the leader, and he would be her servant. He promised to climb trees, gather fruit, do everything. She asked if he was doing all this out of guilt. He replied that he was doing it because he liked her. He promised they would get out of this place, no matter what it took, since that's what she wanted. And with a confident smile, he added that very soon, she would truly fall in love with him. He gently wiped a crumb from her cheek. He told her to eat and think about how love really can feed you. It was their 6th day in the jungle. Hajun had turned into a real-life Tarzan, easily climbing trees for fruit. Yeonhee was worried that her office already knew she was in Jakarta. Hajun confirmed that her absence had been noticed, and now they most likely suspected she was here. She was afraid that strange rumors would start to spread. He asked with a smirk if she was afraid everyone would think they had run away together. She replied that it wasn't that extreme, but they might think they were in some kind of relationship. He noted that it wasn't that far from the truth. She protested that they just hugged while they slept, and nothing more. He put his arm around her shoulder. Hajun asked with a sly smile if she was upset that they weren't going any further. She flushed with indignation. He continued to tease her, saying her words made it sound like just hugging wasn't enough for her. She turned away, trying to explain that a simple hug didn't make them a couple. He asked what else she wanted from him. She was at a loss. She hadn't even accepted his confession, so why was he acting like they were already in a relationship? She laughed and said there was nothing between them. Since she hadn't accepted his confession, they weren't a couple. He said that if formalities were important to her, he would confess again. And he asked her directly, "Will you go out with me?" She was taken aback, asking if he meant right now. Yeonhee tried to dodge the question, saying they were busy digging up cassava. Just then, she unearthed the biggest root they had ever seen. She was thrilled at the thought of a delicious dinner. Hajun noted with a pout that she looked happier now than when he confessed to her. He said he was going to wash up and left. Yeonhee wondered if she had been too harsh on him. Quite some time passed, and he still hadn't returned. She started to worry that he might have fallen into the river and ran to find him, shouting his name. Yeonhee found him by the river, his back to her, without clothes. She covered her mouth with her hand in shock. He turned around, and she was faced with his muscular torso. She clamped both hands over her mouth to keep from screaming. Hajun smirked smugly. He splashed water on her, and she yelped from the cold. He jokingly called her a pervert. Covering her eyes with her hands, she started making excuses, saying it was an accident. Then she ran away in a panic. Sitting by the fire, she was grilling a fish. She thought that he didn't seem to mind her peeking at all, and even looked pleased. Then again, with a body like that, he had every right to be proud. She shook her head, trying to banish the indecent thoughts. Just then, Hajun approached and told her to look. He held out 3 warm eggs to her, saying they would have scrambled eggs for breakfast. She noted that the eggs were a bit small. Yeonhee quickly corrected herself, saying they were big enough, but her thoughts returned to his body. She covered her face with her hands in despair. He asked what was wrong, if she was disappointed that he only found eggs and not a bird. She assured him she was very happy, but he didn't believe her. He said he had prepared something else. She peeked out from behind a huge bouquet of wildflowers. Hajun held out the flowers to her, saying he had picked them for her. She took the bouquet, admitting that no one had ever given her flowers before. She was so happy, burying her nose in the beautiful and fragrant flowers. He said she was even more beautiful. She was more resilient than any wildflower, and her scent was much sweeter. He called her the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. And he asked again if she would go out with him. This time, without hesitation, she said yes. He smiled happily. But suddenly, his expression turned serious. He told her not to move, no matter what happened. He told her to close her eyes and stay still. She thought he was going to kiss her, and obediently squeezed her eyes shut. But when she opened them, she saw a snake coiled around her shoulder. Yeonhee froze in terror as the snake touched her arm with its tongue. She felt like she was about to lose consciousness. At that moment, Hajun pulled her toward him. He kissed her, distracting her, while the snake slithered onto his back. She stared at him with wide eyes, feeling his lips on hers. He closed his eyes, focusing completely on the kiss and the danger behind her. Her hand hung limply, trembling. But then she clenched it into a fist, regaining control. The kiss continued, and the snake was still nearby. Yeonhee realized the snake was now on his shoulder. She tried to pull away to warn him, but he only held her tighter. The kiss deepened, becoming more passionate. The snake, hissing, crawled across his shoulder. This moment, full of danger and passion, felt like an eternity. Finally, the snake slid to the ground and slithered away. But they were still kissing, no longer out of fear, but from the overwhelming feelings between them. Later, as they sat in the shelter, he called her over to look at the sky. The night sky was dotted with a myriad of stars. He said it was the first time he had ever seen such beauty. Yeonhee smiled and suggested it was nature's reward for their suffering in the jungle. But he said he had already received his gift. That gift was her, Mo Yeonhee. He gently took her hand, intertwining their fingers. He called her the greatest gift he had ever received. She looked at him, unable to say a word. He told her that the starlight they were seeing had traveled for millions of years from the distant past to reach them. In the past, he had no one by his side either. But now, she was shining next to him, and the stars reminded him of them. But unlike the stars, which he could only be thankful for, he wanted to do so much more for her. He wanted to make her happy. She looked at him, her heart overflowing with love. Suddenly, she noticed shooting stars. She cried out in excitement, suggesting they make a wish. She closed her eyes and silently wished for Mr. Kang's wish to come true. When he asked what she wished for, she jokingly replied that she wanted to become rich. He answered seriously that for that to happen, she would have to marry him. She was shocked. She protested. How could he talk about marriage when they had only just kissed? He asked innocently, "Isn't marriage the next step after a kiss?" She argued that they hadn't even been on a date. He repeated thoughtfully, "A date?" He took her hand and suggested they have one right now. He said, "Let's go on a date." The campfire burned brightly, creating a cozy atmosphere. He pulled her closer and said this would be their first date. Simple, but warm. He suggested she imagined they weren't in the jungle, but in a cafe on the outskirts of a city. He even offered to sing for her, though he had never sung in front of others before. He clarified that he doesn't sing in front of other people, only in front of her. Her heart pounded wildly. She suggested they play the word game again, since he seemed to enjoy it so much. He agreed and started. Star. They continued. Radio. Ocean. Kickboard. She got stuck on the letter K again, because the only word that came to mind was kiss. Yeonhee still couldn't think of a word for K. He asked with a sly smile if she needed help. And without waiting for an answer, he kissed her, whispering, "Kiss." The next morning, Hajun asked with concern if she was okay. She pouted with her swollen lips and angrily asked how he could kiss her all night. He struggled to hold back his laughter and apologized. He thought to himself, how could anyone hold back when she was so cute? They were walking through the jungle when they heard dull thuds. Yeonhee excitedly asked if those were drums. Hajun smiled, confirming they were heading in the right direction. She shouted with joy, "We're saved!" She muttered that she hadn't been sure. He was surprised, asking if she had been following him without trusting him. She replied that he didn't know where they were either, so how could she trust him completely? But she thought it would be hard on him if she didn't believe in him. After all, it's easier for people when someone believes in them. She said with a smile that she was glad she believed in him. Thanks to him, they were saved. He was touched by her words. He replied that no, they were saved thanks to her. They continued toward the sound of the drums, which grew closer. Suddenly, Hajun stopped. He raised his hand, stopping her. They hid in the bushes. A snort came from the thicket. And then, a growl. A huge wild boar appeared before them. Hajun whispered that boars have poor eyesight, and if they stood still, it would mistake them for boulders. Yeonhee highly doubted that. She noticed arrows in the boar's back and realized a local tribe was hunting it. Suddenly, a dog jumped out of the bushes and started barking. The boar charged at them in a rage. Hajun grabbed Yeonhee and jumped to the side. He fell, shielding her with his body. He immediately asked if she was okay. Peeking over his shoulder, she asked if he was hurt. He told her to stay put. He stood up and walked toward the boar, ordering her not to move. Her eyes filled with tears. She saw that his leg was bleeding badly, but he just waved it off, telling her to listen to him. The boar, with its red eyes, snorted, preparing to attack. Hajun stared resolutely at the beast. Suddenly, something whistled through the air. A few more arrows struck the boar, and it collapsed to the ground with a roar. The beast was dead. Natives emerged from behind the trees with a dog. Yeonhee let out a sigh of relief. She realized the danger had passed. Hajun immediately hugged her, covering her eyes. He whispered, "Thank God, you're safe." He pressed his face into her hair, still trembling from the experience. She pushed him away, frantically pointing at his wound. She didn't know what to do, seeing how much blood he was losing. He tried to calm her down, saying everything was fine, but she stared in horror at the torn flesh on his leg. She jumped up, yelling, "What was he thinking? Why did he do that?" She asked through tears if he had forgotten what an important person he was. Had he forgotten that the entire Hain company depended on him? He calmly replied that he did it because he loved her. He asked, "Isn't love worth giving your life for?" At least, that's what he believed. She couldn't hold back and burst into tears. He asked her not to cry, but she couldn't stop. He asked in confusion why she was crying. He assured her that he was fine. Through her sobs, she confessed that she had accepted his confession, thinking they would break up as soon as they returned to the city. He was stunned. She wanted to leave him? She answered yes, because it would never work out between them. He argued that they loved each other. She said that was only here, in the jungle. In normal life, their feelings wouldn't last forever. He listened silently, as she said that people's feelings are always changing. Hajun gently stroked her hair. He said he doesn't open his heart easily, but he doesn't change his feelings easily either. He realized she didn't distrust him, but the world. He told her not to worry. He promised he would become her world. She clung to him even tighter, letting her tears flow freely. At that moment, the natives called out to them. They stood before two warriors with bows. Hajun stood in front of Yeonhee, telling her to run into the jungle if anything happened to him. She grabbed his arm, crying that if he died, she would die with him. He replied that it didn't mean she should risk her life and told her to trust him. She cried, asking what she would do if something happened to him. She said firmly that they would either survive together or die together. He looked at her with tenderness. One of the natives asked in English where they were from. Hajun, surprised, replied that they were from Korea. The native's eye twitched. Suddenly, the whole tribe erupted in excitement, shouting, "Korea!" and saying that Korean dramas were very good. Yeonhee was in shock, not understanding how the Korean wave had reached these jungles. Suddenly, she noticed something behind the natives. It was tourists. She realized with relief that their ordeal was finally over. She could leave the jungle, go back home to her old life. But as she looked at Hajun, her joy faded slightly. In the car, driving through the city, he asked if she was tired. She said she was a little, but was glad they got out so easily thanks to the tourists. He told her to get some good rest at the hotel. Hajun said thoughtfully, "We're finally back." He thought about how he didn't know who tried to kill him, but he wouldn't give them a second chance. Having survived the jungle, he no longer feared anything in a world ruled by money and skills. The only one he feared for was Yeonhee. His enemies might find out about his fear of losing her and use it against him. He couldn't let her become their target. Back at the hotel, Yeonhee was on the phone. She found out that people from the Jugang group had indeed searched her home, just as Hajun had predicted. She tried to convince the person on the other end that there was nothing between her and her boss. Her brother on the phone listed all of Hajun's derogatory nicknames, not believing his sister could fall for such a person. She realized with horror that she herself had always spoken so poorly of him in conversations with her brother. After hanging up, she collapsed onto the sofa, exhausted. Explaining things to Yeonhee was going to be very difficult. She remembered how she used to see Hajun in the city, as a cyborg, an alien, obsessed with success. But the Hajun she got to know in the jungle was completely different. She knew everyone would laugh if she told them they fell in love in a week in the jungle. She looked at the luxurious chandelier in the room. With her salary, she couldn't even dream of a room like this. Looking at her reflection in the window against the backdrop of the night city, she remembered falling asleep in his arms last night. It all felt like a dream. At that time, in the Hein Company office, everyone was in a frenzy. Ms. Han was on the phone, saying they were going to increase the number of people on the search party. Suddenly, she received a call from an unknown number. It was Kang Hajun. She was overjoyed. But when he heard her address someone as Mr. Moon, he tensed up. He realized it was Moon Kyosung, the head of security, and that his father had sent him here. With tears in her eyes, she said she knew he would be safe. He informed her that he was in the city, but wanted to stay low for now. He also confirmed that Ms. Mo was safe and with him. He asked if she wanted to know why Yeonhee was with him. She understood it was something important. He explained that besides Yeonhee, the only person he trusted was her, Han Doyeon. He had left his bauxite purity tester in Korea. So last Friday, he called Ms. Mo and asked her to bring it to Jakarta. They were in the crash together, and now they were in love. In shock, Ms. Han dropped her coat. She asked in disbelief if he loved Ms. Mo. In her mind, she doubted if he even knew what he was saying. He firmly replied, yes, calling Yeonhee his first and last love. Ms. Han sincerely congratulated him. However, she added that the situation didn't look very good right now. When they tracked his location via satellite and arrived at the crash site, there were already traces of other people. It seemed someone had hired mercenaries to track him down. If they had returned to the wreckage, they both would have been in danger. Ms. Han sighed, chiding him for not telling her about his trip to the mine. He apologized, explaining that he had acted on his own, hoping to speed up the contract signing. Miss Han was shocked. He apologized? For the first time ever. He admitted that he had changed a lot after being on the brink of death. She was surprised that even the fragile Ms. Mo was able to endure such an ordeal. He laughed and said he only survived thanks to Ms. Mo. He confessed that in the jungle, he was completely useless. He couldn't start a fire, couldn't stand the insects and the cold. But Ms. Mo bravely led him, gathered fruit, built huts, and caught fish. Hajun said he was alive now only because of her. Ms. Han smiled, noting that she didn't know about this strong side of Yeonhee. But Hajun said that wasn't the only thing that opened his heart. He started to see the world differently. He becomes a better person when he's with her. But Ms. Han interrupted his touching story, saying she had something to tell him. Yeonhee sat in the hotel lobby, waiting to meet Hajun. She couldn't believe that this elegant man in a white suit was the same person who had been wandering through the jungle just that morning. She asked about the wound on his leg. He said it was fine, just a few stitches. She told him to be careful not to get an infection. He was silent, and the atmosphere became awkward. She tried to break the tension by asking when she should return to work. He suggested she take her time and rest, maybe go on some tours. But she was worried, as she had been absent for a week. She didn't know what to tell Miss Han. She decided it was best for her to return to Korea the next morning. Hajun replied that he was staying because of work at the mines. She said she was worried about her brother, but Hajun informed her that a housekeeper had already been assigned to him. Yeonhee realized it wasn't his stern appearance that made her uncomfortable, but their changed roles. In the jungle, their social status didn't matter, but in the city, everything was different. She clenched her fists, gathering her resolve. She said she had thought about his confession, and in the jungle, it felt right to accept it. But now, back in the city, she didn't believe they could work out. It seemed unrealistic. She explained that she had a hard life, and all she wanted was peace, and that was impossible with him. He wanted to boost her self-esteem, but in the end, she only suffered in the jungle. She wanted to make him understand that the more he tried to do for her, the unhappier she became. She could already see how much misery their union would bring, and she didn't want any more trouble. She said it wasn't his fault. He was just too big for her. And so she asked him to let her break up with him on good terms. Hajun stood in a room decorated for a party. He was planning to throw a celebration for Yeonhee. But her words about wanting a normal life, which was impossible with him, echoed in his mind. He remembered his conversation with Ms. Han. She had informed him that the order to hide his disappearance came from the chairman himself, likely out of fear of the stock prices dropping. She also found out that his brother Sung-jun had been buying up Hain Company shares through a proxy, possibly planning to take over the company in the event of his death. And his stepmother, Mrs. Jung, had sold some land and received a large sum of cash. Hajun immediately wondered if that money was used to buy the satellite and hire the mercenaries. He realized that Han also suspected someone in his family. She warned him that his family could become Yeonhee's future in-laws, and they would try to manipulate her to hurt him. He thought that if he had asked her to stay and fight with him, she would have agreed. She would smile and endure, and he, oblivious, would think she was happy. He grabbed his head in despair. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to make her happy. He remembered his mother, who used to say she was happy just seeing him. He remembered her calling him to hug her while she was drunk. But he, a little boy, would run away from her. Her words, "I love you forever," haunted him. He, smashing the cake he had made for Yeonhee in a fit of rage. The cake was dripping down the window like tears. He had so much power to protect Yeonhee. But what was the point if it only put her in danger? He thought bitterly that it would have been better if they had stayed in the jungle. Yeonhee walked down a busy street, thinking that if she had known how it would end, she would have accepted his confession sooner. If she could go back to the jungle, she would tell him she loved him on the very first day. Then she would have spent the entire week in happiness. She squatted down in the middle of the street and burst into tears. She didn't know what to do now. She stood up and yelled at herself. Why didn't she fight for him? She wondered if he was waiting for her to dump him first, or if she had just hurt his pride. She remembered his words, that love was worth giving your life for, and his promise to become her world. She sobbed in the middle of the street, ignoring the car horns. Suddenly, a car pulled up beside her, and a worried Miss Han looked out. She told Yeonhee to get in the car immediately because it was dangerous on the street. In the car, Ms. Han looked in the rearview mirror and noted with relief that they weren't being followed. She asked why Yeonhee was walking alone and if Hajun hadn't told her anything. She said she understood the gist of her conversation with Hajun and that Yeonhee didn't have to hide anything from her. She exploded, shouting that mercenaries were involved and Hajun should have warned her about the danger. Yeonhee was shocked. She knew nothing. Ms. Han advised her to be careful for Hajun's own sake. Yeonhee didn't understand what was happening or why she had to be careful. Ms. Han explained that it was about the person who tried to kill Hajun and orchestrated the helicopter crash, and they were afraid she would be the next target. Because now, she wasn't just a secretary, but Mr. Kang's girlfriend, and the culprit could use her as bait. She entered her apartment. Ms. Han told her that Hajun's first order after making contact was to ensure her safety. He was ready to go through fire and water to save her. Yeonhee asked in horror if this meant Hajun was in danger because of her. Ms. Han confirmed that it was obvious. The company was at a standstill without its CEO, but he was in hiding for her safety. All that was required of Yeonhee was to take care of herself. Ms. Han and Hajun promised to do everything to find the culprit. Yeonhee thought it would be a simple matter, but it turned out to be much more complicated. Her eyes filled with tears. She realized he didn't want to stop her, but he couldn't. He was afraid she would be in danger. She cried because she hadn't known anything. Yeonhee remembered his words about a love worth dying for. She clenched her fist and firmly decided. She loved Mr. Kang, and she was also ready to risk her life for him. There was a knock at Hajun's hotel room door. He thought it was Ms. Han, even though he had asked her not to come. He wanted to be alone and decided to just ignore the knock. But the knocking persisted, again and again. He slammed his glass on the table in a rage. Annoyed, he went to open the door. He flung the door open, ready to give them a piece of his mind. But Yeonhee was standing on the threshold. He was stunned by her appearance. She said she had something to tell him. He was flustered and confused. He saw the overturned cake on the floor and, claiming to be drunk, asked to talk tomorrow. He clutched his head, trying to compose himself. She entered the room and saw the party decorations. He awkwardly explained that the hotel staff had mistakenly thought it was a honeymoon suite. He noticed her tear-stained eyes and asked if she had been crying. She said a little. With a smug smirk, he asked if she was upset after dumping him. Playing along, she agreed. She asked who would carry her on their shoulders now, who would catch seashells for her in the night sea or shrimp in the mud, and finally, who would risk their life for her. With those words, she downed his drink in one gulp. She coughed from the strength of the drink. He got worried and was about to get her some water, but he froze in place. She came up behind him and hugged him tightly. He whispered her name. She asked him not to move because she was too embarrassed to say it to his face. And she whispered that she loved him very much. She said that although she wasn't as good as him, she knew how to endure hunger, cold, and hardship. She was willing to wait as long as it took. And when he recovered from the pain of her dumping him, she asked if he would come back to her. He turned and took her hand. He asked in disbelief if she was serious. She smiled and said she could wait even 10 years. Without another word, he pulled her to him and kissed her passionately. His fingers tangled in her hair. He gently held her face. The kiss was full of tenderness and pent-up feelings. Barely able to control himself, he gently pulled away from her. He understood that their feelings had taken over, but he asked if she would be willing to wait for him until he sorted out all his problems. She smiled and replied that he probably didn't know her best quality. Waiting was what she did best. Then she pulled him closer, drawing him into a deep kiss. Hajun gently pushed her away, saying they should stop, or he wouldn't be able to control himself. "I love you, Mr. Kang," she whispered, easing his doubts and allowing him to completely lose control tonight. The next morning, sunlight flooded the bedroom. Yeonhee woke up next to a sleeping Hajun. She smiled, thinking how meticulous he was about everything. She gently stroked his head. She remembered him singing to her in the jungle so she wouldn't get lost, and thought that now it was her turn to wait. She kissed his forehead, promising to sing so he wouldn't get lost and would find his way back. Later that day, Yeonhee ran into Ms. Han in the hotel lobby. Ms. Han invited her for coffee. At the table, she asked with a smile if they had made up after their lovers' quarrel. Yeonhee nodded shyly. Ms. Han reassured her, saying there was nothing to be ashamed of. She remarked that this was a new side of Ms. Han. Ms. Han, in turn, sympathized with Yeonhee for having to survive in the jungle with such a prickly person as Hajun. Yeonhee immediately defended him, saying he tried very hard, found food, and built huts. Ms. Han smiled and corrected her. He changed not because of the circumstances, but because of love. She told her that she had been looking after Hajun since he was a child. Her first job was as Chairman Kang's secretary, and her direct superior was Mrs. Jung, the chairman's current wife. She called Mrs. Jung a real piece of work. At that time, she was responsible for taking care of little Hajun. His biological mother was very ill and couldn't care for him. Her duty was to hire nannies for him and report everything to the chairman. But she couldn't stand to see the boy being treated so cruelly, and eventually, after a big fight with the chairman, she quit. She left little Hajun, even though she was the only person he could rely on. She returned to work for Hajun, not out of guilt, but to prove to the chairman that he was wrong. She was extremely worried when Hajun went missing, afraid she had lost him forever. She thanked Yeonhee, calling her an amazing person because she was able to change Hajun. She asked if Yeonhee was returning to Korea today and what she planned to do about her job. Yeonhee replied that she would continue to work hard. Ms. Han asked how, in her opinion, she herself had achieved her position. She always knew that Yeonhee quietly and diligently performed her duties and wanted to take her under her wing. But it seemed Mr. Kang was the first to recognize her talents. Yeonhee was touched that someone had finally acknowledged her efforts. She thanked Ms. Han, but Ms. Han said she was more grateful to her for not abandoning Hajun. At the airport, ready for her flight, Yeonhee mentally thanked Indonesia for the unforgettable memories. Suddenly, a familiar voice called her name. It was Hajun. He asked if she was really going to leave without saying goodbye. She replied that he was asleep. He said she could have woken him up and hugged her tightly, ignoring the surprised stares from those around them. He reminded her that he didn't care about other people. After all, they didn't call him an alien for nothing. She smiled and said he was different now. He worried if she would be able to fly on a plane, offering a boat as an alternative. She hugged him tighter and said she wasn't afraid of planes anymore. The only thing she was afraid of now was being apart from him. A few days passed. Hajun, having stayed in Indonesia, was catching up on work. He thought about how it had been 3 days since Yeonhee returned to Korea and worried about how she was doing. If she was eating and sleeping well, he was sure she missed him and was worried. Just then, his phone chimed with a notification. It was a message from Yeonhee. She wrote that she had heard from Ms. Han about the contract signing and was very happy. He smiled, imagining her happy face, and felt an overwhelming urge to hug her right now. He wanted to see her, to touch her, but didn't know what to write back without seeming too clingy. Another message came through. She wrote that he must be busy and asked him not to get distracted by replying. But to him, nothing was more important than her right now. She wished him a good night. He almost screamed, "No, don't go!" in a panic. He sighed. She was in such a hurry to end the conversation, and he couldn't call her, as she was still hiding their relationship from her brother. He realized she just didn't want to distract him. But right now, he was only waiting for her messages. He agonized over what to write back, but everything seemed inappropriate. He accidentally sent one word: wishing. Deciding that the faster he finished his work here, the faster he could return to her, he dove back into his work. But then the phone rang. He picked up the phone. It was his father on the line, who reproachfully asked how he could make him worry so much and not even call. His father listed how he had sent a whole plane with security for him and was ready to send 500 more men into the jungle. Hajun coldly replied that if his father was truly worried, he should have given him a warm welcome and apologized for pretending not to know about Sungjun's schemes. His father said it was just Sungjun's attempt to prove himself. Hajun sarcastically asked if that justified an assassination attempt. His father insisted it was a mechanical failure, but Hajun informed him there was a detonator in the helicopter. The chairman refused to believe Sungjun was capable of that. Hajun said he used to think so too, until he ended up on the island. Now he wasn't so sure. He promised to find the culprit and make them pay. His father expressed no desire to help with the search. Hajun realized his father also suspected Sungjun and was just turning a blind eye. He was about to hang up, but his father stopped him, saying he would take care of it so there would be no rumors about the secretary who was with him on the island. Hajun was silent. His father advised him to be careful. Then Hajun asked how his stepmother was doing. He guessed that she was the one who hinted to his father about a possible relationship with the secretary. He realized his father's words were actually her words. He asked him to pass on a message to her. He said that she, more than anyone, should know how much one has to endure to achieve their position. Hearing this, his father threw the phone in a rage, while Mrs. Jung just smiled coldly. Meanwhile, in Korea, at Samsung subway station, Yeonhee was making her way through the rush hour crowd. She sighed with relief. She had even missed this hustle and bustle. Now she knew for sure she was back home. She looked at the message from Hajun. It consisted of a single word. There. She didn't understand what it meant. He was acting strangely, sending cryptic messages. She wondered if he had ever sent a personal message before. She realized that, although it was clumsy, he was trying for her, even while being extremely busy. She smiled, pressing the phone to her lips. She missed him. Suddenly, she flinched, bumping into someone. She was startled because the man, from behind, looked a lot like Mr. Kang. She decided she was just imagining it because she missed him. But when the man turned around, she gasped in surprise again. Deciding she was staring too much, she turned away, planning to get some coffee. She found her coffee coupons and decided to use one to celebrate her return. Leaving the cafe, she saw the same man again. He smiled at her. She got flustered, not understanding what was happening. In the lobby of the office building, he caught up to her. He asked how long she was planning to follow him. She was taken aback by the question. He said this wasn't a place just anyone could enter, and that it was strange for her to follow him all the way to his workplace, smitten by his looks. Yeonhee tried to object, but he offered to take her number and said he would think about it. She bowed politely and said goodbye, leaving him bewildered. She thought that she would have tried to explain herself before, but the time spent with Hajun had changed her. It seemed people really do become like the ones they love. At her desk, she opened an email from Ms. Han. It contained a detailed schedule for the contract and a note that Yeonhee was officially listed as her assistant on a secret mission. It was the perfect cover, but she doubted her colleagues would believe she was involved in such an important matter. She was more worried they would suspect her of being in a relationship with Hajun. Just then, a colleague, Ms. Sun, approached her. She greeted Yeonhee cheerfully and said she had been very worried about her. Yeonhee explained that it was a confidential assignment. Her colleague said she saw the notice and congratulated her on a job well done. But then she lowered her voice and said that while Yeonhee was away, strange rumors had been circulating. Since Hajun had also disappeared around the same time, people were whispering that they had some kind of secret. Okay, you guys, let's wrap this up. Honestly, this story is such a wild ride, literally. I am low-key obsessed with the whole role reversal vibe. Seeing this cold, genius CEO go from being a complete cyborg in the office to a literal Tarzan in the jungle, I'm here for it. And can I just say, I absolutely live for these kinds of deserted island survival stories. There's something so addictive about seeing two people from totally different worlds forced to rely on each other to stay alive. It makes the romance feel so much more intense. Mo Yeonhee is such a badass. She's building huts and catching fish while her billionaire boss is out here struggling with spider webs. It's hilarious, but also so sweet to see him finally melt. But now that they're back in the city, I'm getting nervous. With mercenaries and family drama in the mix, things are getting dangerous. What do you guys think? Now that they're out of the jungle, how do you think their relationship is going to develop? Will their love survive the real world and his crazy family? Or was it just a jungle fever thing? Let me know your theories in the comments because I need to know what you're thinking. If you're enjoying this journey as much as I am, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part. Trust me, the drama is only getting started. Stay tuned because to be continued.